Is May 16th, 2019. The time is now 6:03 p.m. I will now call to order the City of Sherwood Budget Committee meeting. Katie, will you please do the roll call?
Chair Mirda Meyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Nancy Taylor. Here. Susan Claus. Here. Matt Kaufman.
I'm here.
Paul Mayer.
Here.
Tyrone Stemmers.
Here.
Katie Strode. Here. Mayor Keith Mays.
Here.
Council President Rosner. Here. Councilor Browse. Here. Councilor Garland.
Here.
Councilor Griffin.
Here.
Councilor Scott is not available tonight, and Councilor Young. Here.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with department director presentations. We will have time for general public comment at the beginning of the meeting. If you wish to speak, please fill out the public comment form and give it to Colleen. The committee chair, who is me, will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through me, please. It is now time to approve the May 9th, 2019 City of Sherwood Budget Committee meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful, thank you.
Could I make one comment on the meeting minutes?
Okay.
Sorry, we wasn't provided an opportunity to do that. On page 9, state revenue sharing, we did actually in the meeting discuss that there was approximately $60,000 of state shared revenue that we're missing out on for marijuana taxes, and I was just hoping we could get that included in the meeting minutes.
Of course.
Yeah, so can we amend the approval?
I don't have a problem with it. Does anyone else?
So we would need a,
Motion to amend?
so we had a motion, now we're in a discussion. So what happened is that the prior motion was passed prior to a discussion.
Correct.
So we are requesting to nullify the prior vote. Now we are having a discussion. The discussion is now on amending the
State revenue sharing.
portion on state revenue sharing to include that there was discussion of approximately $60,000 in revenues from marijuana that is not currently being received.
Do we want to call that lost revenue?
Sean, how would you like the minutes amended?
I would just say that there was a discussion about the state revenue taxes. The marijuana portion of that would have been approximately $60,000 to the city of Sherwood. I think the discussion was that we're not receiving due to the ban on recreational marijuana. I believe was the wording that was used, something like that.
I don't recall it actually being a discussion. I thought it was a side comment between you and Nancy, where she said, how much was that? And you said about 58,000.
Staff would be able to go back to the recording and bring back the minutes with that amended, and we could postpone the motion until next week with just that amended in there, if that would be preferable.
That works for me.
Okay, let's do that. We'll postpone approval of the meeting minutes until our next meeting, provided there is a next meeting.
There'll be a next meeting.
There, oh, is everybody
I
confident?
love the enthusiasm.
Okay.
Yeah.
She was
I think that was
hopeful. Hey.
wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking. All right.
And I'm sure Josh would have something to say about the fact that we started a motion and didn't finish it. So,
Yeah, that's
Josh,
true.
are
I'll
we
withdraw.
okay?
I can withdraw my motion. Can I do that?
Yeah, we did.
No, his motion.
Second.
Wait, he didn't make a motion. So
So-
a motion was made to approve the minutes.
So I'll move to
Amend the minutes.
amend the minutes, but aren't we holding off on the minutes, or are we not approving these minutes as presented?
So we voted to do it, and that, so we have to reverse that.
So
Is
the
that-
problem is that I was remiss to ask if
For discussion.
anyone was interested in having a discussion before the motion passed. Therefore, it really wasn't a valid motion in the first place because I should have called for discussion. My apologies. So therefore, the question really is, Josh, did we or did we not have a motion?
We had a motion.
Correct.
Minutes are approved.
The minutes have been approved.
Okay,
Staff will bring back amended minutes at the next meeting, and you can have a motion and a second.
perfect.
Vote to approve them.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. Moving.
Thank you.
Josh, you want to come and sit next to me?
Or maybe me. All right. I will now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2019-2020 City of Sherwood proposed budget. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to Colleen. I will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed to me, please. When you come to the microphone, please do state your name and city of residence for the record, as this hearing will be recorded. Please do speak clearly into the microphone. Please limit your testimony to 4 minutes. Colleen, has anyone submitted? Okay. Is there anyone here that would like to? Nope, we're good. Okay. I will now close the public comment.
And just for the record, there have been written comment that has been submitted, and you've all received that.
Okay. Moving on to new business, please. We'd like to welcome Captain Hanlon.
And in your books, this is on page 67 and 68.
Jeremiah, if I may, just a quick reminder for everybody, Captain Hanlon is our budget manager. He did that last year and then again this year, so good experience. And my intent is to build a depth of knowledge and experience in my team. So he's going to roll with this. I'm just going to sit in the background and assist as need be or requested.
Thanks, Chief.
Good evening, everybody. My thing's on, right? So, as it's been proposed in the budget, there are 3 bodies that have been added to the police budget specifically. One is an administrative assistant. The second would be a detective, and the third would be a supervisor. Excuse me. I think it shows in there, and I can find the specific page, but we have staggered the starting dates of those. The admin and the detective would be effective July 1 of this year, and then we would implement that supervisor January 1 of 2020. It does 2 things. Number one, it's cost savings for us initially, but it also allows us to do some training on the front end with the detectives, the second detective that's coming in, before we start moving bodies around again in January, because our assumption is that we'll promote from within for that supervisory role. So there, whoops. Thank you. That's why I brought him. So we'll be able to stagger that over that 6-month period.
And Captain Hanlon, if I
Yes.
may, for those of you who have your packets from last week, if you'll look in the supplemental packet, he's referring to the police staffing plan that's on page 9. There's a table in there that shows the timeline and the positions. Page 9 of 32. I think that might be what you were all trying to find in your packets.
So with these 3 bodies, just quickly, I wanted to discuss why we have identified them as our 3 priorities, especially for this cycle. And the first is the administrative assistant. Historically, we've had 1 records specialist in the department. She's been there for the last 20 years. She oversees our records management systems, our CJIS compliance, our LEDS audits, the front counter reports. Anybody that comes to the front window, basically she was responsible for. And then there is Angie, the administrative assistant, that augmented that also supported a lot of the back end with the chief and those things. And we identified early on, as a matter of fact, several years ago, just the overwhelming burden of work that was there, coupled with the fact that we implemented red flex or the photo red light here back in 2010. That added work has a ripple effect, as it's been seen in the court system as well. But then in October of this year, we added the speed on green. And so just so you have a perspective of what happens there is, all citations, as you've probably heard, are reviewed by an officer. They're issued. And then typically, whoever receives a citation can do one of a few things. They can either pay it online, they can appear in court, or they can send a declaration of innocence, which we see a lot of that, basically saying that it's not us or it's not me. And all that comes to the department. So somebody has to physically go through there, review it, and then determine if there is validity to this. It goes back to the officer, they review it, and then they make a decision. My point to that is that somebody in the front has to touch every one of these. And when we're issuing nearly 2,000 citations a month, based on the speed on green and the photo red light, there's a lot of paperwork that comes through there. Since January, since our temporary personnel, or Sabrina's been there, she says her time associated just specifically with the photo enforcement program is about 50%. So that includes her dealing with all these citations that come, the declaration of innocence, the phone calls, the counter inquiries, and then any of the attorney questions. We get a lot of discovery requests now that we have to deal with. That there's just a lot of things that are always in motion with these particular programs, let alone the daily things that we're asking her to do, because she now deals with all the customer contacts, all the records and report requests that come from DAs and come from insurance companies. So needless to say, she is filling her 40 hours plus easily, along with Angie and Julie, who are still consumed with their load of work that they do as well. So it's been a great ad so far for the first first 5 months we've had her. So that is somebody that we definitely knew we needed, and we have seen the value and the return on that exponentially. So that is the first one that we would obviously like to continue with this budget. And then the second one would be the detective. I'm going to take a little time and
Captain Hanlon,
yes.
before you move on to the
Okay.
detective, I have one specific question. You said that the administrative assistant is spending 40 hours plus currently. Are you finding that you are paying out overtime for her?
No, she's not. It's just, when I say 40 hours plus, she could easily stay there and continue to work. It's not like at 5 o'clock she's like, oh. I mean, it's literally, I'm getting, she's getting up from her desk and just walking away from it.
Okay.
And it's just, it compounds, as if we all recognize that in our jobs, that it can compound with, if you decide to walk away from it, it'll be there for you tomorrow.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question
Sure.
also with that? So is that the only person on your staff? We have the clerk staff too, the Lisa staff. Is that the only person with the police department that deals with the citations?
Yes, her and Angie specifically deal with them.
Okay, and is that like one FTE total that goes toward the citations?
Yeah, I would say that if you combine, what's that? Yeah, I was going to say you combined Sabrina and Angie's time, I would say really close. I mean, it ebbs and flows. We know, obviously, the cycle of the citations. So if you average it out, I would say yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that particular position? So the second one, oh, yeah, sure.
So definitely the speed on green cameras are, thank you. The speed on green cameras are definitely driving additional workload this year. And I was just curious, because there's offsetting revenue for that, so I was curious what that looks like for the year in terms of how much additional revenue are we seeing from this speed on green? Sorry. I'm kind of looking at Katie here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So we do have additional revenue from the speed on green that covers both the court position and that position in police. So far, we haven't moved it to specify, which position is covered by what. But right now, it does cover the positions, specifically the positions that are added. Not a lot more than the positions that are added, especially if you add in the administrative time and the other costs associated. But we could come back with with a total cost including the specific expenses associated with it. We have not run that total cost of program.
I think it would be helpful, just to understand. That's, yes, there's a lot more work, but we are covering it with revenue.
We okay there? Yeah. So, I'll bring this here. So the second position that we are looking at filling is a detective position. Currently, we have one detective, and their sole responsibility, and I say solely, is that they are having to pick and choose on what they are able to work, and essentially we just keep the high profile person crimes specifically for this position because they would be too bogged down. And I'll give you some stats, and I think you guys received, the chief gave you some of our stats as far as calls for service and some matrices in comparison to some of the cities around us. And I don't know if that's in your packet or not. It's going to be, yep, what page? It's
Page 28, I think, or 21.
Yep. So a lot of times we get, I don't want to say hung up, but we get caught up in per thousand, officers per thousand, crimes per thousand, this and that. And a lot of our data and a lot of our rankings are based off of that. And you'll see that in the last few years we've done, as a matter of fact, in the last several years, we've been very successful in being in probably the top 2 or 3 safest cities in the state. And that's something to be proud of, and that's not, it's something that we work very hard as the police department and as in the support of the community to ensure that that continues. But the one thing I think we forget that we've overlooked is the reality of the crimes that we're not investigating. And I'm going to go back to what I talked about with one detective and their ability. Right now, and on page, if you look at the, it's page, well, it doesn't have a page.
23.
So I'm going to, do you guys have this? Because I don't know why I don't have, is that detective caseload potential? Okay, so if you could reference that, and at the bottom of it, it talks about some of the crimes that we're talking about there. It talks about assaults with weapons, burglaries, death investigations, domestic disturbances, juvenile abuse, robbery, and sexual assaults. And you can see, obviously, the trend continues from 2010. And in this particular graph, it had 2018 at 104 because this was done before the year end. But that number, as we have found, was 137 total. What that means is that one detective has the potential of working 137 cases just in those categories. And I can guarantee you, because I supervise the detective, that he does probably touch 137 of those cases, either through advice or assisting or interviewing or literally taking the entire case on and running with it. So people always want to know where his caseload is or the detective's caseload is. And again, that can ebb and flow. And I did ask him the other day, you know, where things sat for him. Of course, I don't know. I think he had, I wrote it down here, now I don't know what to do with it. He was working 11 active cases. I believe 12 were excuse me, I'll find it here. 12 were at the DA's, and then there was probably about 9 that were inactive. And those can become active very quickly, just simply from a phone call from somebody deciding that they wanted to pursue a case that they initially had said I didn't have an interest in. As a matter of fact, that has happened here just recently. And it makes it very difficult when you have one detective without anybody there to assist them on interviews, out-of-town interviews, out-of-state interviews, as this particular case I was referring to includes. So he can, at times, be incredibly busy. And I tell you that because these cases are extensive. They're typically all felony cases. They require a great deal of follow-up, a great deal of interviewing, and a lot of interactive with the DA's office, with other detectives of other agencies. And on average, we broke it down, a case can work, and I hate to call it simple because they're not. I mean, they're delicate and they're important, but sometimes they can be as straightforward as 40 hours to other extensive cases in the hundreds of hours, just because of the things that need to be done, the evidence that needs to be collected, the grand juries, the witnesses, all these things that you know and we've talked about in great detail. So I tell you that because we have one person doing that, and he can't do it alone. Because what happens is we are completely ignoring, and this is not by our choice, I hate to even tell you this, but we ignore basically all property crimes that are, and I don't want to call them minimal, they're difficult to work. Thefts, car break-ins, unless we catch them there on the spot. I mean, unless it's just a great breadcrumb trail for us to them, it's difficult for us to get there. Number one, because we don't have the resources, and secondly, as you know, we have 2 people that are typically on patrol at the time. So if we know that a suspect lives in Tigard, Portland, Newburgh, Tualatin, Beaverton, that we typically can't get out of the city to go track these people down, because then we're leaving one person in the city to follow up with this, and the reality is it doesn't happen. So it leaves us without that being worked. Embarrassingly enough, we don't work any drugs in this city, and we know it's a problem. It's a huge problem. Opioids, marijuana, meth, all the prescription drugs. I am astonished at the number of drugs that are dropped off at our department. I don't know if you've seen our drop-off box, but that thing is filled weekly? At least. This thing is stuffed full and we have to empty it. I tell you that again because that's just the people that are being responsible out there getting rid of the stuff they don't need. That's a fraction of the drugs that are out there that they're crushing, the Adderall that kids are crushing and snorting, the heroin that has been rampant, not specific to Sherwood, it's here, but it is a state issue, and we don't work it. We work it when we come across it, don't get me wrong. I mean, our guys are out there actively.
Hi.
Yes.
If I could ask, does anybody not appreciate the importance of getting these 2 positions filled? I mean, you can go on a narrative, but we also have a lot of things this evening.
So I did actually just want to ask, so what would be the kind of the working plan for having a second detective? How would the workload of caseloads be divided? Would each detective be assigned separate cases? Do they work on difficult cases together to speed up a case? Or what's the benefit of adding a second?
All the above. So they're going to have a team. They'll be able to go out and interview. They'll be able to go outside the city with assistance to make contact with suspects, to go out and do the things that they typically couldn't do without asking assistance from outside agencies. They'll pick up some of these burglary cases. They'll be able to address some of the bigger drug cases.
Hit the spectrum a little bit.
Absolutely.
A little bit lower on the spectrum as well.
Take a vacation.
That, and not to belabor this, I just wanted to make sure I got my point across, Mayor, that it's the importance of this is we are not actively working any child pornography cases. We don't. We used to have a detective that worked at online soliciting. The city does have prostitution in it. We know it. We've worked it. We just don't get to work it like we need to. And we know that we have registered sex offenders in the city that, unless they pop up on our radar because of a case, we're not actively engaged in that. And so, again, it would be an opportunity to participate in some of those things.
The detective is the second detective is the one that would be helping with those things so we could engage.
Absolutely, yes.
And then does the detective that we have, does that detective have a lot of overtime?
Yes. Yeah, I apologize.
I mean,
I couldn't.
There.
And I'm going to tell you, it's a burnout position because we ask a lot of them. And it's
not just 40 hours a week, and it's not just Monday through Friday.
No, he is on call 24/7.
As a point of reference, Katie, what is the delta between approved budget versus where the police budget sits now? Given
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So given a fair amount of overtime has happened, how does the police budget sit currently?
So the police budget right now is sitting right where it should be.
Okay.
As far as compared to budget. If we go on OpenGov, but yeah, it is on that,
Okay.
on the page that's handed out.
Hasn't been an overage.
In overtime, we are currently, as of today, we are right at what was budgeted for overtime. So we're going to go over budget in overtime as of the next payroll. However, with the department as a whole, will just squeak through in overall expenses, even though it's going over in overtime. The overall personnel expenses look like they are just going to come in
Okay.
right on.
So I just want to add to that, we historically work really hard and make adjustments to stay within our overtime budget, and we have consistently, except for last fiscal year, we kind of blew it out. And there's a lot of reasons for that, some of which are in that packet. But the other thing that I need to point out is that it's not just always dollars in terms of, oh, my word, look at that overtime budget. Our overtime budget is fine. It's about burning people out.
Sure.
You can only ask extra work for so long and so many hours. And the detective before, Detective Asla, managed 3 years and said, I've had it. I can't do this anymore. So that's, when you talk about overtime for any position, that's a big condition and a big part of it that I look at and my team looks at and says, hey, what are we requiring of folks in what is expected to be, generally speaking, a 40-hour work week with some overtime. And there's things you can't control like court, but that's a big part of the issue as well.
So he's been doing like what, 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week? What's he been doing overtime?
Yes. It can be upwards of 20, depending. If he gets called, just a quick example, he works a full day and he gets called out on a death investigation or whatever. I mean, that can take him another 10 hours, and then he's got to follow up right on top of that with, it's all going to be time sensitive, and a lot of these cases are, because if there's grand jury or if there's interviewing that needs to be conducted, he can go, easy 20 hours in a week, or he can stay within his 40. Again, there's a lot of variables, but he is unless he's out of town, the expectation is that he responds.
Nancy, did you have a question?
I just have a quick staffing question. Right now, you're fully staffed. Did I hear that?
Correct.
Okay. And what do you think, if you're looking in the crystal ball, what do you think you're going to see in the next 24 months in terms of turnover?
You mean retirement or people leaving, or?
Just people turning over.
Hopefully none. I mean,
So you're not getting a feel for turnover.
I mean,
The reason why I ask that is, are you going to be trying to promote from within for this detective
Yes.
slot? And if you do that, is that going to be bringing on another person that you need to train at a lower level? Okay.
that has always been our burden in law enforcement, is it's just never a plug and play position. We have to build from the bottom, and that requires at least a year of getting somebody up to speed to work the road. And so always backfilling. I mean, we always look and are not opposed to laterals, but those, finding the right ones to fit here can be a challenge. Okay, if we're good there, I'll jump right into the last one, and that's the supervision one. That's our supervisor. As of today, we have 3 supervisors, and when I talk about supervisors, that's the sergeants. Those are the ones that oversee the patrol officers on a shift. We have one that's currently on days, one on swing, and one on nights. And right now, what that means is that covers 50% of our work time. So 50% of the time, if all our supervisors are working, we have 50% coverage. And as you know, we are the highest liability agency or department in this agency, and so the decisions we make have to be sound. And a lot of that comes from guidance and direction of good supervisors. And when you have young police officers out there in the middle of the night that need to make split-second decisions, you're hoping that there's going to be somebody there that they can call or can show up on a scene and walk through this. This 4th supervisor doesn't get us to 100%. It gets us to about 67%. So It's not where we want to be, but it's better than where we're at. And so this force supervisor, we haven't set up the exact schedule of how that'll be to give us the best coverage, but it will certainly give us more opportunity to have people out on the road helping and guiding in the decision-making process for issues that arise. And just an example, and I'll be quick, is last week you may have saw, I think you guys got the email when we all stood up and went out. We had a supervisor on and 2 officers, and we had to deal with a man with a gun just on the edge of the city here. And we ended up having to deal with that because the uniqueness of where we're at, it's the closest units that are there, and a lot of that area is Washington County, so there's not always a deputy that's patrolling around here. And all 3 of them had to go out and deal with this particular situation, which was resolved, thankfully. But we did have a supervisor there. He was actually the first one on scene, and he was able to help direct some of that. And the end result was positive. Nobody was hurt. Everybody went home safe, and the bad guy went to jail. So I think it was a great example of why we need as much supervision on the road as possible. Not that other people couldn't handle it, but it's always nice when you have some seniority and some experience there to help guide, especially in those kind of situations.
I guess I have the same question. This 4th supervisor, will you try to be promoting from within again?
Yes, yeah.
That will leave another slot.
Yes, and that's kind of the idea behind the staggered. Obviously, again, the budgetary component of that and the savings, but also just to kind of stair step some of our movement so that we are getting people trained and getting people moved as necessary.
And you're not leaving holes.
Hopefully, yeah. Everybody good? All right.
We still wanted the dog, but.
Chief, I have one question. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Julia. So if memory serves correctly, as we sat around this table last budget season, we didn't bring on any officers.
Correct.
And I don't recall, and I may be wrong, but I don't recall you requesting additional staffing.
Correct.
So it's clear that there's been an uptick in some calls, but I'm wondering if there's been enough of if the demand of violent crimes aligns with the need for 3 more positions. The administrative position seems pretty clear. The need for supervision, again, seems pretty clear. Having that supervisory role to support officers seems a no-brainer. But the detective position, well, it's always great to have more staff than less staff, and I think regardless of the industry that you're in, it's always better to have more people than fewer people. As I'm reading through the notes, I'm wondering why such a change right now, when last year it wasn't as much of a priority.
Good. So last position we added to the police department was in 10-11 budget. Since that time, there has been lots of conversation about the need for additional police officers. Many of you that are in the room were around back then and can probably remember those discussions. And I would remind everybody to not confuse my not asking with the lack of need. Fact of the matter is, we all work collaboratively on this budget process. My job is to work with my city manager and be part of a team. And so when we're entering a budget cycle, or cycles like we have had for multiple years as we're trying to fight a recession and trying to recover from a recession. And I'm not the kind of person that's going to say, well, I'm just going to ask for bodies to make a point when I know I'm not going to get them. So mind you, the conversations have been there. And if you look at the statistics we provided, the workload has been increasing for a couple years now. It's not, oh, all of a sudden we're seeing an increased workload. So I think it's important to understand that this is not a new need. This is really what we've come to the point of where I told city manager, conversation with Katie, council, police advisory board, then council, chamber, lots of folks that we're kind of at a very specific point on the road right now where if we want to retain what we have in Sherwood and what we've enjoyed for so long in Sherwood, it's time to reinvest because we've put this off for several years. And what we enjoy today, we didn't pay for last year. We paid for 10, 15 years ago with the investment that's been made. And if we want to have this, what we have today, 5 years from now, it's time to start the investment now. The questions that Nancy asked were very on task specific to this. We don't just go out and get a police officer like we can pluck a piece of fruit off a tree. It's a long process. So it's the buildup. It's part of the plan that I submitted, even though we're not talking about anything else but this fiscal year, but it's a part of where we need to go to have the staffing we need to take care of this community into the future. And then the last thing I'd say, and I'm trying to go as quick as I can, is that I would go back to just in terms of apples to apples. So one of the things in the staffing study said that there was really no way to compare investigative workload. And there absolutely is. So Ty mentioned the safety index, if you will. So we made a comparison to the top four safest cities based on the 2016 report that came out. And that is on this slide. Detective comparison. Whoops. And then also the following slide by the same title. And what you see is that other safe communities, it's not just based on population, it's based on specific safety index. So other communities that are as safe or very close to being as safe as we are, that's what resources they're dedicating to their work. And we are woefully understaffed on that. And all that does is prove what we know. I mean, we see it. When you have a detective that fights for a position and has a position that is they've wanted to have and they look, and after 3 years, they could go another 3 years. We would let them, it's a longer position than that. But after 3 years, they say, I'm done. I mean, we know that there's more than, and when we look at the cases, I mean, Ty's talked about all this. I don't want to rehash it, but that's the answer to your question. So
Thank you.
the need is not new.
And I appreciate that, but I think it's important to really drive that point home, especially for the community that may be listening to this portion of our meeting, because it has been an ongoing discussion, absolutely. And as opposed to me saying, yep, this conversation's been happening, I think it's important for the public and our community to hear it from the police department directly, that it isn't because of a lack of need. It's because of a lack of resources that we haven't been able to bring in additional resources.
Now, I'd also point out, historically, we've had more than one detective. This police department has a history of that. Early in my tenure, we had 2 detectives. Fact of the matter is, we had to pull one away to put into patrol. I had to redirect those resources. That won't happen now because we have to have an investigator. But so we've had to, and we've kept 2 detectives busy in the past. So,
and I'd like to add something to that because the need's there. I mean, there's no question in my mind, and thank you for those comments because I do think it's important for the public to know. But the other side of this equation too, which you kind of alluded to at the beginning of your statement, is last year we had a tight budget. So you can't ask for something you know you're not going to get. This year it's still tight, but we also have almost a $700,000 increase in budgeted fine and forfeiture money, which is basically a lot of that's being driven by speed on green. And that helps offset some of these costs. And in my mind, my opinion, that's the right place for that money to go, is to help bolster our police department.
Can I ask you after you, whenever, just don't leave, Jeff.
I just wanted to make one quick point for the public. We all have this in our handout that, back in 06, 07, our total staff at the police department was 25. 17, 18, 12 years later, we're at 26. Population's grown 20%. We've added one staff member to our police department. So.
And I wanted to ask you too, over the last couple years, has the increase in calls, have they been coming from specific areas of town or all over town? Or, I mean, are we having, where is it coming from? It's not just because we haven't had like a super surge of population in the last couple of years, but we have had the call increases.
Right. I think it's come from several different sources. It's, there's, I mean, I could pull, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I suppose I could try to find some of the bigger culprits. But fact of the matter is, as the community grows, and even though our population has not, we haven't had an explosion in that, population oftentimes doesn't drive increased calls. What drives increased calls is what I call the infilling, right? This community has filled in from the middle out. And there's more traffic, there's more commercial activity, there's more, I mean, there's just lots of things that play into that. So there's no one thing that I can put my hand on. It's just the fact of the matter is Sherwood is far more dynamic than it was a decade ago. There's more activity in town. There's probably, although I have never seen the stat and I don't know how we'd get it, I suspect from the time I started, so 11 years ago, I suspect there's far more people in town throughout the day than there used to be. When you count traffic, when you count customers, when you count business dealing. And so that's a huge impact. I mean, that's going to drive calls for service. So.
And do we still maintain, we used to have a dot map that you could see, like we were having a lot of break-ins along Century Drive as an example. Do we have a dot map like that? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Do you?
Yeah, I remember because we talked in years past. It was crime maps, and no, we don't for a couple of reasons. I didn't get a tremendous amount of feedback that it was accomplishing what we had hoped it would accomplish. But the primary reason, quite frankly, is when we got into 08, 09, 9, 10, 10, 11, we were looking for nickels to squeeze so that we could maintain training budgets and everything else. And so I cut it out of the budget. It costs about, if I remember right, it costs about $1,500 a year, and I just didn't see that it was money that was as good of investment as it could be.
I have one quick question. How many companies here in town actually have active security guards?
Very few.
Very few.
Sadly, that's a thing of the past because of liability, because of cost, lots of reasons. What we find is that there's all kinds of different models, but like when I started, Fred Meyer in Tualatin was active. We were going to several shoplifts a week that they had in custody. Those days are gone, and so there's, like I said, there's different models, but they don't look like that anymore. And so on the one extreme, they may be somewhat like that, and they'll staff loss prevention certain hours, and to the other extreme where they don't staff any loss prevention, and if they find missing product, they either just write it off, which is hugely problematic because it sends a horrible message for a community. Or they stack it up, what we call stack it up, and then call us and say, oh, hey, we've discovered 6 thefts. And literally an officer will have to sit down and take 6 different reports and could be tied up an hour getting everything together. So I have had conversations with folks, but I can't tell them how to run their business. And so, absent some kind of law that says you have to, it's not going to happen. So.
They're lost profits.
They're right. Yep.
But they can't expect the Sherwood Police Department to do their loss prevention.
And that's what it is now.
Yeah.
Right. Well, only what we know about. Right. So if somebody goes into a business and stuffs a backpack and walks out, and the company decides they're not going to do it, and they never call it, we never know. So we're not going to, you know what I mean? We're not staffing those positions for them. We will respond when we're called. And we're still called a lot, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a lot of theft that takes place in Sherwood, but it's not, it's not near what it would be if they were running the old-fashioned loss prevention, but they're not.
All right, we have one more quick question. and then
I'll add something. I just wanted
Yeah,
to-
one thing that affects me is what Ty said about the loss of the crimes that aren't being investigated at all, property thefts and calls like that is amazing. And, you know, I think it warrants, you know, a second person looking into some of those too. I mean, there's lots of things that go on. I've had property theft in my house that, you know, a patrolman comes out and to the house, and we talk about it. He makes a report. Christmas was one thing. You know, one of my decorations disappeared, and he said, "Yeah, kids just pick them up and move them to another house in the other side of town or something." So.
Now, the bigger issue is the big theft that an officer will work until it leads out of the city, and then a uniformed patrol officer doesn't leave the city. That's not their job. Their job is to be driving around in your neighborhoods and trying to prevent it. So when it gets to that point, we're out of leads.
So just had a quick point. So I wanted to point out for people at home who don't have the packet in front of us. So this is actually my third budget committee meeting since being a counselor, and this is the third year that we're not getting a new SRO. But there is one planned for 2021. And I think Captain Hanlon and Chief Groth did a great job of explaining the need for these three, and I support, you know, what they're saying on that. But I think getting a new SRO for next school year with the new high school, I'm going to use the phrase non-negotiable. I would really like to just get that out there, that I think we really need to get that new SRO in place. But it is, I wanted to point it out because it wasn't brought up in the presentation, that it is actually on part of the plan for the police department in July of 2020. But I am going to press hard to get that in place for next year. So.
I agree with you 100%. I think that's important. And again, just for the public out there, there is work being done this year with our consulting company that helps us lobby with the federal government to go find federal grants.
COPS grants.
COPS grants to pay for those SROs. So,
Yeah, we're pursuing other people's money to help with some of these immediate needs, for sure.
Thank you. I think that's a great point. Hi, Julia. Welcome.
Thank you. Launch.
oh wait, no.
Launch away.
So I am community development. As you know, community development is planning, building, engineering, code compliance, economic development to a certain extent. We currently have actually 14.75 FTE.
Yep.
Yes.
What page?
Oh, I'm sorry.
62 to 66.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have 14.75 FTE in our department. It's not all in the general fund because we work on capital projects and things like that. And as you know, we are proposing to add an economic development position. I think the budget calls it a coordinator. It might be a manager. We're not sure exactly what we want to call this person, but we know what we want this person to do. Basically, it's to, one of the main reasons is to support council's goal of economic development in the community. It will work under community development and will really focus on business retention, growth, and attraction. What we envision, the position would be coordinating with businesses in the community, coordinating with Greater Portland, Inc., West Side Economic Alliance, neighboring economic development staff, maintaining data about the community so that we can quickly and promptly respond to people that are looking to look in the city and kind of have information just readily available. Being a resource of information for businesses, it's just really critical. The more I've done in economic development this past year and talked with economic development staff from other communities, I realize how much more we really should and could be doing. what else? Facilitating for existing businesses that want to grow, being a resource for them, making sure that they know kind of if they need more workforce development, getting them in touch with the right entities at the state or wherever to kind of help businesses in the existing city stay and grow. And then another key thing that we want this position to do is really to identify and track metrics to gauge how the position is doing and how economic development is doing in the community. With that position, I'm confident that it will be a very active full-time position. I think there will still be a lot of things that I will be doing as well as Joe will be doing to support economic development. So it won't be just a full-time position, but I think it's necessary. Any questions?
How do you plan on getting the staff member? I mean,
Recruiting. So we need to develop a position description, which we're currently working on, looking at existing position, similar position descriptions in neighboring communities, and then, advertising, certainly getting the word out through economic development, professional groups and organizations and things like that. We looked at neighboring jurisdictions and the salary scale as we were preparing the budget, so we're confident that the budget that we're putting in for the position is within the realm of what an economic development manager would expect to do. Limited duration is always a little challenging because not everybody's going to quit a job and come for 2 years, but I think we'll have to be creative in how we advertise the position so that it's clear that our hope is that it could become a long-term position. But that's something that we'll kind of get to during the interview process, I'm sure. So.
and do you have any hope of promoting anyone from within?
I don't believe so. I mean, I don't know if there's any hidden skills. I mean, it's a special skill, and that's
exactly.
You have special training and special abilities and special knowledge, and I don't know that I'm not aware of anybody currently at the city that would have those skills, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't apply, and we just don't know about it.
Or you actually had
No,
to
go ahead.
first.
Go ahead. Were you also, when you also talk about what the council's goal is for that person to do? What is that person going to do for us?
Well, that's all part of what I wanted to
Perfect.
hear, because we want to make sure that it is a robust enough of a position so that someone will bet on themselves to apply, to take the job, to making it a permanent thing. I fully expect that we'll be rating somebody that's been doing this professionally in another community to come to our community to do it so they can hit the ground running and not have a learning curve, and have that network and experience of saying, hey, as a community, you should really be doing this and this and this from a planning perspective or a whatever perspective to help them be successful in the goals we give them. So I think it's important. I was concerned with the title of coordinator. I'm not sure what the budget is for the position specifically, but I want to make sure it's robust enough to get someone, because it is a high priority for the community.
Yeah, when I was looking at sort of where this position should go on the salary scale, I was looking at economic development manager positions around the area, Tiger, Tualatin, those types of places. And yeah, in addition to all the things I said in terms of just being that resource and that connection, they're also going to have connections and abilities to get us and people in touch with other people's money, so grant sources potentially for spurring economic development, funding sources to support local businesses, things like that. My expectation would be that position would have the ability to bring in money in addition to bringing in money to the community.
And I would add from a council goal, kind of what we see in his position. And I'll start with where other communities have had a lot of success. If you look at what Lloyd Purdy was able to do in Oregon City in revitalizing their downtown, and then Tigard stole him, and they've done an amazing job of revitalizing their old town. Someone like that who understands how to go out, work with the community organizations like the Chamber, the Main Street organizations, what's the Portland one?
Greater Portland Inc.
Greater Portland Inc. And these organizations that, I don't know if anybody knows what GPI is, but they're a clearinghouse for companies that are coming in and say, hey, we're looking for a location to build a factory or something, and GPI helps them find that. So working with those organizations and coordinating all that and coming up with those plans, the grant opportunities, what's going to work here, is critical. It won't happen unless we get really proactive about it. So
You need an active role, not a passive role, just somebody's coming to town and we'll take them, so, yeah.
To meet our goals and our challenges as a community, we need commercial and industrial development to occur.
And I think some of it as well as we talk about attracting new business, but also making sure that we're addressing some of our current business owners as well and making sure that we're helping them in the ways that we can as well. I mean, there's obviously with the chamber, but some of the people who aren't part of the chamber and just other local businesses have been really pushing many of us, personally for this type of role as well, somebody that they can have as a liaison between them and the city to address some of the concerns or needs or areas of improvement that they've seen in other communities, specifically the ones that, Tim just spoke to. So I think it's a really all-encompassing role, and it's clearly a big role, and we need to find the right person to do it. Exactly.
Yeah, I know some counselors have met with business owners, current business owners who are a little frustrated and who realize we don't have an economic development person and they don't know who to go talk to. There's not a point person within our city right now. It's split between Joe and Julia and whoever else, and I think it's difficult, and I think having a central point person will be huge for our city.
We're big enough now. We need it.
Yeah, and for the record, I mean, I think of myself as that person currently, but I also have a lot of other hats that I have, and so it is challenging. So having that be a dedicated resource is really important.
Again, steal from someone else, no learn on the job.
Cool.
So I have several comments with that. One is absolutely, Kim and Sean, the business people in this town feel that there is not someone there that speaks their language that can help them in the nuts and bolts of what they have to do to be successful. So we need somebody like that. But and a lot of those are small businesses. So that is something that's ongoing. I don't see that as a 2-year thing. I think that that's partially a role that we have to have consistently in.
Can I speak to that? So the 2-year is purely from a budgetary standpoint. The city strongly feels that this is a position that needs to be ongoing. Because of the buckets that we have available to us from a budgetary standpoint, we only have funds available in the one time. We don't have any funds available in the ongoing bucket. That bucket is completely tapped out.
Right.
Where it's at right now. And so what we've said is we believe so strongly that this is important that we're willing to use the one-time bucket and say that this position, that we believe that within 2 years we will see how important this position is, and that with what it drives in the community, we will be able to find the ongoing revenues in one way or another within those 2 years to sustain the position. So that's what the message is that we're trying to convey with this. It's not that the position would end in 2 years. It's that we hope it can move to the other bucket.
Okay, and so is this our current list of one-time
That's correct.
activities? So where is that dollar amount? I mean, where is that for the business person that we're talking about?
It will be down in the personnel ads. Let me.
What page is that, Susan?
It's on page 17 of 33 on our packet from last week that has the agenda at the top, at the front of it.
Let me just pull that up.
It looks like at the very bottom, that 115,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's where it says economic development coordinator.
Yeah, one-time position.
Yeah, on page
It's on page
19.
19.
And that's the personnel changes. If you look on page 18 at the very bottom, that's under, it has also under the one-time expenses.
Okay, and that's 115,000 a year that we're estimating.
That's fully loaded.
Benefits, everything. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean like,
That means it has the PERS and it has the health insurance and it has the social security and all of that.
but that's 115,000 a year,
That's correct.
right? Okay. And this budget is only putting them in for this year.
Correct.
Part of, I think what you guys told us last time is that the firm that we've hired to go to DC, we have them doing that job of trying to get economic money, right?
We're chasing lots, we're chasing a dozen.
And I think that's a different, what they would do would support us and the economic development person in doing those things. They're not going to be able to do the same thing that an economic development manager is going to be able to do.
Okay, he's going to, or he or she they're going to pursue separate granting and funding from separate.
They're going to do whatever is needed to do to support economic development in the community, which might include helping a small current business grow and expand and navigate through the process. It might be helping them find funding through the state and just get them connected with the right people. It might be suggesting and or applying for grant funds for workforce development, workforce training, transportation funding, infrastructure planning. It could be any sorts of things. And there are lots of opportunities out there in the community. So I don't think it's going to be something, I would expect that this position will be doing all of those things and then having the support of CFM to help them in that mission as appropriate at the federal level.
And will that person be tapping any of our other staff? Or is that person by themselves? Do they have it, like, they don't have an admin? It's this person, they're going to be doing.
They're going to be in community development, and we don't silo ourselves, and so I certainly expect that the community development administrative assistant that's 3/4 time will be able to support this position. I will be supporting this position. I mean, there will be multiple ways that we are all working together, as well as that position potentially supporting. They might be giving advice. They should be giving advice on the comprehensive plan process. They'll be giving advice on CIP development. It will be interactive.
And they're still, like what Tim was talking about, they're still going to be pursuing those big possible businesses that want to come in, that are looking for parcels, although we don't have hardly any.
Sure. So we do, in Tonkin employment area, we do,
Right.
and certainly that will be something that they do. But that's the big fish, and they'll also be focusing on getting the small fish too and helping the fish grow, if you will. So it's not absolutely. It's not going to just be focused on trying to get the big fish. It's going to be really growing our
Greater
economy.
Portland Inc., they're not just about the big Intel campuses. They do
Right.
they do a lot of site searches for smaller companies as well. So being connected with that organization, understanding what opportunities are out there, and putting our best foot forward as a community is really important.
And so the last thing I want to say on that is that whatever that criteria that you're going to be putting together for that position, I think it would be totally appropriate, and I don't know, and I'm not saying for anybody that's just on the volunteer committees to get in the middle of personnel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying as an additive process, if the city council looked at what you thought the list of criteria was, or we want someone that has at least this many years experience, or this or that or that, if they just saw that beforehand, and if they had any input on that, so we don't, the worst thing I think that could happen is us to pretend like we got somebody that can do it, spend the money, and don't have,
Sure.
aren't getting.
And just, we would never just make a position description up out of thin air.
No,
We
I
would look
know.
at other existing position descriptions and of similar types of positions and go through a process. And I What I envision, I haven't talked to Joe about this, but what I envision is, and it's totally not abnormal to do this, is to seek consult from our, some professionals in our neighboring jurisdictions who can help us, who are already in the economic development world, who can help make sure that we're getting someone that is really good at what they do. And we've got
I
connections.
think the mayor's point is important, that this is not a training position. This is not hiring someone
Amen.
who's never done economic development. We want to go steal someone or lure someone or do someone that knows how to do this work and bring them to this great community so they can do a great job here. If we as staff go out and hire somebody that doesn't fit that, we're going to have some difficult discussions with our elected officials. So that's what I heard tonight and on an ongoing basis. Find the right candidate. And, that's our challenge.
And I would add to that, and I think this is where you were going, Susan, is it's the right candidate and then making sure they're empowered within the organization to get their job done, which I'm very confident you will do. So,
Thank you for all you do, Julia.
Are there any other questions about community development, planning, building, engineering, budgets?
No, we did agree.
Just one comment. I'm sure you've seen the comments from the last comp plan meeting. There were several, and Susan, I think, touched on it a minute ago. There were several comments from business people in the meeting about what's going on currently that needs to be improved. So.
Yes, I am very aware of that. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Next, we'll move into Public Works and invite Craig Shelton to come up.
We're moving to pages 75 to 78.
So we'll start with facilities. The main changes in facilities is the roof repair this year at the PD of $191,000. We did budget in this budget $35,000 for the Moorback roof repair, and also it actually was funded through the SEPA program, so that is $35,000 that can come out of our budget in facilities.
That's the Metro grant.
Yes. Because at the time, when we were doing this, putting the budget together, the SEPA grant hadn't been decided if they were going to get it for their roof or not, so.
Yeah, you totally trailed off.
Yeah, can you speak into the mic?
At the time when we were putting our budget together,
Uh-huh.
and we had not got anything from the Moorback House on the roof replacement, they actually put in for the SEPA grant, which is the Metro grant, and council with Metro counselor authorized them up to $20,000, and then for roof repairs, I believe. I just went through their process here just within the last 2 weeks of selecting a contractor.
So is that another 20,000 savings that's in the budget?
That's actually $35,000
35,000
for the Moorback roof.
Extra to the budget.
So
What line item is
SEPA
it?
stands for.
Section CEP, Community Enhancement Program.
I don't. Is that what it's called? Yes. So, anyways, so that's really in facilities. Most everything in facilities besides a repair at the field house and the HVAC system, Public Works field house, everything's pretty status quo in that budget.
So Craig, on the roof of the PD, is it a complete new roof?
Yes.
Did we get the life out of the roof that we expected?
Yes.
Also,
That roof should be 15 years, and we had an inspection done from a private company probably 2 years ago. They said it had about 3 years left. So sometime between 2002 to going into 2003 is when that roof went in, and we know from dealing with the why, if we don't replace it, what's going to happen. So either put a bunch of money into it and not spend the 191 and then come back within a year or so and replace the roof.
And Craig, if I,
in general, that type of designed roof, flat-ish roof, should last 15
Yeah.
years.
With a membrane roof is 15 years like that. Yeah. What happens is it starts pulling away and it's no good, so.
So Craig, if I could just ask, I know that in last year's budget committee meeting, we had a citizen came up and stressed the importance of maintenance, ongoing maintenance, and unfortunately last year we kind of had to push some of that out, and I know that in some of the other things that tends to get kicked down the line a little bit, and we always keep on saying that's a ticking time bomb. Are we addressing some of those things that have been pushed out in this budget? Are we?
We are. So as far as what's in the budget comes out of our asset plan, there has been a couple things we've moved out, both in facilities and parks, just because they don't need to be replaced at this time. One of the biggest things is if you continue to move stuff out, you'll see the senior center roof's going to be replaced within the next few years. It starts adding up in 1 year, and you don't really want that. So it's good to spread it out over time.
So that 35,000 that you saved with more, but do you have something else you want to do? Or do you want that to go toward the senior roof? Or, I mean, do you,
think it goes
as
back.
our main person on maintenance and repair and?
I think we're good for this year. I think the senior center roof can last another year or two.
So, yeah, but my point is on the 35,
I think it should go back in the budget.
go back in the,
General
just
fund.
in the general fund, okay.
Where's that reflected at? What line item?
Oh,
It would be.
It's line item 6312.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that instead of 184,000, it's,
Less 35.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
I didn't catch that.
And I can
till-
bring that back as a proposal for the final approved budget so that it can just be placed in there and that amount deducted.
Hey, Craig, why, I think I asked you this before, why is our janitorial services going up
So,
$30,000?
Yeah.
Because we're taking care of,
so that is another, we have a money budgeted right now, what we think it's supposed to cost. But we have signed a 6-month contract with 2 different companies, somebody doing this facility that's not a QRF because the QRF actually gave this facility up. So we've got a private person in here, which is less money than the QRF. And we have QRF doing our other facilities, but when the QRF come back recently it was $326,000 to do all our facilities versus about 180, 185. something.
what is a QRF?
QRF.
Sorry, Qualified Rehabilitation Facility.
Okay, thank you.
And we're required to use
It's
that.
a state.
Yeah, state requirement.
They came in at 300 and some?
Well, they went from 152 to 186, so we questioned that. And then they rebid the whole facilities, and it came in at 326. We negotiated that down into the 200 bracket. Then they gave up this facility, so we went out, and it was about half of what they were costing for janitorial. But it's going to take a while to bring the new company on. They just started last week, so.
To replace,
So what could happen is we could have an issue down the road in 6 months of not being able to cover all the janitorial cost in here, depending on what those bids come back at. So, and we're hoping that's not the case.
Better
but-
hold on to that 35.
Yeah, better hold on.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's where we're at right now. So in 6 months, we'll be rebidding all our facility janitorial.
And for those of us listening in the public world, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the QRF program from the state level basically requires us to use certain companies for this work, and they generally are companies that hire disabled people or people in rehabilitation mode or something like that, which is a great concept, but the challenge we run into is there's not enough competition in terms of the number of companies that are out there, so they keep ratcheting rates on us. Did I get that right?
The state actually runs the program, and we haven't got a lot of help out of that part of it, so.
And we're not alone in dealing with this. Many of our neighbors are also struggling with this, so.
So is it part of the state regulations that they maintain all the facilities, or can it be a portion thereof? They get to pick and choose what, okay.
It's kind of, yeah.
And there's no way around it?
We're working on some stuff. Oh, I better leave it at that right now.
Creativity.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah. Any other questions on facilities? I'm sorry, we skipped over parks. So parks budget is pretty status quo, but one thing I did want everybody to know is we did move out a few projects, but it's because we didn't feel they needed to be done at this time. Some of them probably get a couple more years before we actually have to replace stuff. We did ask for 2 seasonal that we did not get, and I just kind of bring this to your attention as we're having a hard time getting seasonal employees to stick around. We should be at 5 right now, I think, staffed, and we've got just one just started. We got 1 and 1 just started this week. We've had 2 or 3 quit because it's too strenuous at work, and they can go make the dollar amount some other place. So we're really having problems, and the reason why we asked for 2 more, even though we can't fill the ones we got right now, is because if you look in your event section, we end up losing our seasonal employees to music on the greens, movies in the park, or when we need them. And over the years, we've just that's kind of how we've done business. We let them go work on Wednesdays and Friday nights, but we're not getting anything done during the week. And we become a 7-day operation from the end of May through the end of September, that we end up needing those staff members to do our water features, our restroom cleaning. We brought restroom cleaning in-house recently with the changes that we're going to try for 6 months. So that's why those were in the budget, is because we end up losing stuff to the events that we don't get the full amount of time out of our seasonals that we need. So that was in there. Also in there was a maintenance worker one that wasn't funded. And I'm just going to bring this up. This current staff will pick up that workload, but I do want people to know when we built this skate park that I did come and talk to everybody about it. It was going to cost $25,000 a year to maintain that. So that's going to roll into their normal duties every day, that some of those people we don't have, we can't get through all our park system, what we're doing now. So you're going to see some level of services next year. Probably once the actual skate park comes online. I can already see it in the community garden. We don't spend a lot of time there. You can go over there and the grass is probably up to your knees a lot of times. But you're going to see some of the detail work that you've actually seen in our parks probably not getting done in a timely manner this next year, because we're going to have to shift the workflow. So I just want to bring that up so you all know what's going on there, because that's what's going to happen. So we're not probably going to meet our maintenance standards. It was adopted by council back in 2004, I think. So anyways, so that's what I got for parks. Any questions on parks?
Greg, can we see the maintenance standards that were adopted?
Yeah,
back in
you
2004?
can, and we actually have been working on some new ones that actually kind of fits more of our park system now. And then we've been talking with the master plan folks that are doing it, and I think we're going to take those and we're going to combine them in through the master plan. But I can get you the resolution. We actually did the parks maintenance standards in 2004, I think, that actually Woodhaven Homeowners Association at the same time as what their standards are for their greenways. Also, without this staffing position, our trail systems won't get maintained as much as they've been, the level of service has been going on in the trails. So just so everybody knows that. So any other questions on parks?
The one-time fund.
Yeah.
Over on the page 19 of 33 on there, where you've got some maintenance workers that coming from the street fund, storm.
Yes.
Are we saying that those one-time, that we're funding those positions out of those funds this one time for this year? Is that what that is expressing to us? So are you getting some of your maintenance?
Is that the ones that are in storm and streets?
Yeah, storm and streets, yeah. There's
So
two.
the seasonals would be 6 months. That would be permanently, as well as the actual positions in those budgets, what we're asking for. But they don't work in parks because they're funded out of those areas.
So that page 19 is ongoing, is all of the personnel changes. Those are not one time.
Okay.
Some of them could be one time, some of them could be ongoing, but those are all the personnel changes. The 2 pages before that were the one-time changes. I was just trying to group all of the personnel changes together to show how it matched the FTE changes in total.
I have just a quick general question for you. The city's website provides for sidewalk repair help. Where does that fall?
Street fund.
In street fund? Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll wait.
That's where we collect the revenue at.
Greg, what's the average cost for one seasonal?
About 17,000. And that's if we get a full season, 1,040 hours out of them. A lot of them don't work 1,040 hours. They'll come to work for a week and then they need to go on vacation, or it's so.
It's summer job.
Yeah. So
if there was a potential to add back or to add one of those staff, what would be more important, the seasonal or the maintenance position?
to add back, I would hate to say how we're going with seasonals. We went through this 2 years ago. And we got way behind. And that's when we started looking at, is it full-time people we should be adding instead of just relying on seasonal so much? And I'm back almost to that after we've gone through it this year and last year too.
Back to the.
Because we raised the rate, I think it went from 12 to 15, and then we're right back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago on the seasonals.
This is the answer to full-time.
So I would say the full-time, yeah. I think if you had another full-time in the park side, and then you filled it in with seasonals, some seasonals down the road, we could probably get by, because we got enough work to keep people busy throughout the year. But once you get to a point in the park side, you got to offset some of that, because it's not all year long.
And what does that cost look like?
58,147, yeah.
I just wonder with that $35,000 if that would fund something, but it would help with the seasonal, but it
I
would.
thought I'd throw
It's
it
a
out there.
one-time versus ongoing, so
Oh,
that's.
gotcha, that's true. All right.
Anyways.
And just one thing too is if we need to take a look at those standards as a council for the 2004 standards, given, if it were me, and you know your business better than I do, I'd rather be really good at the things I can get to and strategically say these are things we're not going to do anymore than constantly chasing and being behind on a bunch of stuff. So
I think
that's
those,
something you want
yeah.
us to look at, bring it to us.
I think those standards were put in place. We just kind of use those, but the standards we're looking at right now are more about what our facilities are. Those were mowing standards and that. Now we're talking restrooms, we're talking water features, and a bunch of those. So that's why I think you'll see those through the master plan process, because that's where we're going to put them at. So. All right, anything else on parks? Fleet. A couple things in fleet on the one-time expenses vehicles. We have replacement of 2 police vehicles. We have a replacement of a parks vehicle. It's a 1994, I believe, Ford Ranger. Kind of worthless to how it's set up right now. We actually have a 2000, one of the first vehicles I actually was part of when I got here and purchased. I don't know what that's saying, but that's 1011 Dodge 1-ton dump truck. It's about 50,000. It's a smaller truck. Parks, everybody uses it. What I would say about that is if we don't fund that this year, we got about $10,000 worth of repairs to it. The 2000.
Is that the one that belches out diesel like at no tomorrow?
Well, I don't know if it's the diesel one. I think it's the gas one. But I think the diesel one come from the school district when we started. But anyway, so that's what that 1-ton is. So if we don't fund that, we got a 10.
When it goes by.
No, you can't. You can't. You got about $10,000 worth of repairs that we need to do to it.
It's time.
Yeah, it's not.
Drive it by Keith's house quite often.
And is there a salvage value to that? Like, are we going to get rid of that?
We will, or we'll put it someplace that maybe that we use, that we don't have to do the full amount of work on it, that we use in our de-icing equipment that we use, and we don't take the brand new truck out of service. But it's not something that we've got a long life left of it, because it's about $8,000 for the motor, and there's some other issues with it. And then we have a Toro mid-mount mower. That's a replacement. I think we moved that out from last year to this year. That's come up. And then we put in last year for a street sweeper. We're back this year with that. We can either look at contracting that out. Our current contract is about $155 an hour that we just bid or redid here not too long ago for parking lots. And for us to do it internally with depreciation of a new piece of equipment to get 15 years, I think right now we're about $80 an hour. So this is one of the reasons going back to 2010 or so, we quit using a private contractor. We went to Clean Water Services. Shortly after that, they come in and did it for a few years. Their service, North Bethany, was growing, so they couldn't do that as well as ours. So we purchased a used sweeper from them, and we've been doing it for about that price the last few years. Some years it goes up a little more because if you use sand, your expense is more because you got to sweep that within 10 days after an event, snow event. But on a regular, we spend about 70 hours a month or so sweeping. So, and that's a requirement part of the storm fund, and that's where that's funded out of.
Greg, this year, didn't you have repairs on that sweeper?
We did. We put about $70,000 into that thing for the last 5 years or so to get it going, keep it going. Sweepers are expensive to maintain, and this sweeper was actually used quite a bit before we got it, but just the brooms and everything to maintain them, it costs quite a bit to maintain them, so. But yeah, just so you guys, we have a pony motor that runs that sweeper. It's a small motor, and our life expectancy is about 8,000 hours, and we're all getting close to 10,000 hours on that. So it's not something that you just, when it's down, it's down. Well, and then you don't get your sweeping done and you have complaints. So just so everybody knows that, that's in there. And I think that's about it for fleet. One thing I will tell you is I just got a letter last week that I forwarded to Joe and Katie. We have about $108,000 in the budget for fuel and oil. Was informed starting the first of the month, fuel and oil and any lubricants going up 14%. So just so everybody knows that number, depending on what it looks like the third quarter, our fuel and oil might be off a little bit.
So we get on the fuel and oil, we get a fixed price annual?
Yeah, and they expect 2 increases this next year is what they told us. So our fuel comes off a state bid, and we've done it both ways, looked at it, and they get to raise it, and then when there's what's going on now with the fuel and oil prices are going up, so they didn't raise it this last month, but they are raising it 14%. So
we have a tank back there now?
Yeah. We've got actually a couple of them.
Great. Just before we buy a sweeper, I still like to repeat my request from last year.
More than happy to. That's not a big deal.
Did you want to?
Repeat my request to see the bid for private contractor versus the value analysis of us doing it internally and buying a new. So we
not a big deal.
The record.
Consistent question from the mayor.
That makes sense to me.
Yep. And we just signed a deal, and it's $155 an hour. So, and we can get you that information on the other.
And just for the record, for those trying to follow through, the $150,000 is in here in fleet, and that is directly billed back at the end of the quarter to the stormwater fund, which pays the full amount of the $150,000. So the stormwater fund pays the general fund the full amount of $150,000 for that. But for accounting purposes, the expense has to be budgeted out of the general fund because that's where fleet is located.
Right.
So
but
just
as
so
we
there's
all
not
know,
any confusion.
it's expensive to do all the requirements by Clean Water Services, and so that gets paid for by ratepayers. And so if we could just show proof that we're being judicial.
Oh, that one comment didn't have anything to do with the other one. Sorry. It's that.
No problem. I'm making my point. You're making yours.
So if I understand that right, the stormwater funds can offset that cost in the general fund.
That's correct. So it shows in the recovery in the overhead allocation line in the 6803. In 6803 in the fleet facilities reimbursement. It's in that number.
But we've also got the 150,000 in the one-time.
Correct, because it is a one-time. It's just also comes back.
It really doesn't. I mean, it's deceptive that it's on that list.
Yeah.
So the 200,000 fleet facilities reimbursement includes the 150.
That's correct. I just want to point out that it's not. It's an offsetting entry.
All right. Thank you, Craig.
So the last thing I have is the emergency management coordinator position. I don't want to skip that. I've talked to Joe about this. We put in for 20 hours a week. We had that several years ago, and then it was moved to the police department, and we had that in there with our safety program for the public works department as well as for 20 hours. In Joe's budget, it's funded. But I want to kind of explain there's some stuff that's got to be done in the next 3 years, about 2.5 years, through our water system itself. We have, back in 2008, the city put an emergency plan together citywide. That needs to be updated. We put in for a $25,000 grant through the county, through the state, and I believe we're going to get it. But that's to update our emergency operation plan. But then we have to have a mitigation plan, because look at the earthquake or any kind of event that could happen. If we don't have a mitigation plan, we're probably not going to get a whole lot of money back from the government. So there's some stuff this person needs to be working on. as well as any community water system with a population between 3,300 and 4,900 needs to have a risk assessment done, which we've done some, but needs to be updated, and it's got to be certified by June 30th of 2021 and sent into the federal government, as well as emergency response plan, which is due 6 months later and needs to be certified. That needs to be updated every 5 years for your water system, or you get in trouble. But the bigger thing is, if you ever need funding, you're probably not going to get it through EPA or the state. So there's implementation of Web EOC that for us to communicate with the county that needs to be done. Development and implement of a hazard mitigation plan, as I mentioned. We need to stay current with Oregon OSHA. And we've been fortunate, but there's a lot of laws that change, and that's why we used that person in the past before I went to the police department to stay up and do the training with our employees that we're required to do on a monthly basis. So that's just right off the bat, those are some of the projects the person needs to be working on. There's also grant money out there that we were very successful when we had the position in Public Works in the past of acquiring about $100,000 worth of equipment if we store it for regional use in a case of emergency, that we have got nothing since that day of free equipment. So once Skip left. So those are the things that this person would be working on. Right now, Rich and I have been kind of partnering up doing this, but I can tell you we have other things to do than just work on emergency management quite a bit of our time. So that's why we asked for it, and it's very important. So yes.
So, I don't know why this is my theme tonight, but I'm going to ask. Do you think there's somebody on your staff currently that you would move to a full, this half-time position? Or do you think this is something that you could maybe partner with another city that's on their same water plan that needs the same type of position so that we could have them half-time, they could have them half-time? I mean, how do you envision hiring a half-time person?
So, one, when you're asking about current staff, I doubt anybody in Public Works is, unless they're getting ready to retire or something, would want to go part-time. So not looking at the whole citywide. What you end up in a lot of these positions is somebody that's out of the military or somebody that's retired that wants to work 20 hours a week. They can come in and that's what they do in their background. And so I can't tell you exactly. As far as working with other cities, there's been some conversation with another city of those conversations taking place. But what I don't want to do is be on the short end if an emergency happens and that emergency manager is tied to that other city. So that is very important to me as we move forward with that. So, and I have an idea that could happen with any larger cities.
And one other question. Have you thought about working on getting yourself a committee of citizens who would volunteer, like the Parks Board, to work on emergency management?
That's something that Jill wants to staff.
Well,
I mean, I hate to say it, but that's up to Jill and the council if that's what they want us to do.
This would be a council that I see a huge benefit in to help the city get prepared for the big one or the little one or the any one.
That could possibly be something to discuss with this position. Once that person's on board as an idea, I think we'd have some conversations with council about that. I mean,
Supervisory role.
Or advisory.
Yeah, or advisory role, yeah.
So I think there's a lot of other things out there that could be beneficial to Sherwood once the person hit the ground running. To actually, there's private folks that do things like that to get the community involved that I just learned about here probably 4 months ago through the county that they're trying to merge. Anyways, there's some other things out there that might be able to be brought to the city for training and stuff for the citizens. Any other questions?
Is there any FEMA grants that deal with this type of situation and this type of personnel?
Not probably the personnel part, but there's money available for equipment, and there's going to be money probably from the state of Oregon, part of the resiliency plan that the governor they've been working on, that is going to fund projects and stuff, and this person would be in the loop on some of that stuff.
But not personnel?
No, not that I'm aware of.
But you need the person to go after the
Correct. Right. The equipment is one of the things we're looking for. Light towers that we use on our daily, or emergencies, that water leaks, that we could have somebody else funding some of those things.
So the position could potentially pay for itself in terms of grants or.
Correct.
Or equipment that would typically just hit the general fund.
I mean, going out and getting a $25,000 grant just to rewrite our emergency operation plan for the city that's $25,000 that we didn't have to, so.
And what's the cost of this position? About 50,000? So that-
Is it from this page?
That's correct, yeah.
261. And we're saying that that's included in this budget, or you're saying that you wanted it and it's not included?
It's
It
included.
is included.
Oh, okay. Okay, the
Oh,
way
we
that
have
you
it?
were expressing it, I thought
No, I
that you
just
were
wanted,
making this plea.
just wanted everybody,
that we
no,
had
no, no.
taken it out.
That's what
Oh,
it-
I thought we had taken it out.
No,
too.
I
Yeah.
wanted people to know
Yeah.
what it was going to be
I'm
working
like, I
on.
thought we had.
So, yeah, so Craig, I mean, I think we're all on the same
I'm just
page.
trying
We have
to
to be.
explain that
Yeah.
that's a change in our
Okay.
budget.
Gotcha. You went from the ones you didn't get to that one you
Sorry.
did get. And
Well, I
was all
forgot about talking about it back when we did the one part of the budget.
And I asked Craig to be prepared because I did get some questions about why is that position needed. I need some more information, so.
Captain Daniel used to handle that, right?
Captain Daniel
Which
used to
seems
handle that.
Odd with some of the
It
things.
shifted back to Public Works.
Yeah.
It used to be in Public Works many years ago, and then it shifted to PD, and now it's back in Public Works.
Because part of the work they do is on our water system, for instance. Is there a chance to have transfers out of those funds to help pay for this position?
So we actually, the way that we've budgeted this position is we've put it in facilities. And the reason we've put it in facilities is that it then gets allocated out to the other funds through our overhead process. And so water and stormwater and sewer do pay a good portion of this. The reason that we don't have it specifically allocated out is that as part of this budget, we also have $10,000 in there to work on an overhead allocation plan. And so in order to do the full calculation of everything, I needed to put it in exactly where it is right now until we get that project done so that everything's allocated out the way it needs to be done and that I don't mix things up when we're in the middle of working on things. So that's why it is allocated out. It is distributed out to all the funds. But we plan to look at it during the process.
So of that 53,000, just rough, I won't hold you to it, how much of that's in?
I cannot tell you. I can show you how complicated it is during a break if you want to look at it, and then if you can make sense of exactly how much each dollar.
I only bring it up because we need to protect general fund dollars at every turn, so as long as we're doing it in a manner where we have the ability to do that and maximize that, it's okay.
And I, for one, I'm not super excited about this. Because I want it to remain with staff, both PD and Public Works. That's my gut on it. But
You wanted the,
I think we can still, if
you think we
between the
can
two
handle it?
departments, somebody have that as part of their title, they can still pursue the grants that they're talking about.
Well, respectfully, Mayor Mays,
But,
that's
but
a
I
lofty
know, but
expectation
I
of
don't-
already taxed staff.
let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm truly not, and I think in Public Works, there is, in the admin, not the workers out and about, I'm actually interested in adding more to the folks out on the road. But, I trust Craig, and I'm not gonna push it anymore at this point.
Well, and the thing is with emergency requirements that we have, the police department is not going to know about the facilities of, the water, all of that. It's a weird position.
Oh, absolutely.
That a lot of it has to do with the physicality of what we have in this town.
Yeah,
And
and
what our
if there's
threats
not the
are.
skill set, if there isn't the skill set available within the department, then you just gotta go get it.
That's why when he was listing all the job duties, I was surprised to know it had been in the PD. Because I'm like,
It's been split. It's been back and forth and
And they're
split.
both departments in an emergency or disaster are involved, so they have to work together. I mean, it's not either or. It's just who took the lead. And, you know, Captain Daniel had experience and passion for emergency management, and when he left, we decided to shift it back to Public Works for a variety of reasons. And largely so police can focus on police work. So
Unless there are any immediate questions for Craig, I'd like to propose that we take about a 10-minute break and we'll come back.
yeah, I have one comment just because Chief Growth wanted to make sure to let folks know he left the meeting to go to the Police Advisory Board.
Okay.
And he just wanted to make sure everyone knew.
Insulted. He's not in the room.
I'm glad you said that, Joe, because I was
I
worried.
thought there was another emergency
You're
somewhere.
No.
You're
I was
fine.
just-
You just need to bring the dog in. She's been outside for a long time.
All right, so we'll reconvene at about 8:50 or 7:55. Excuse me. 8:55.
Hopefully it's not 8:55 yet.
So the time is now 7:57, and we are going to continue on with general fund discussion. And Joe, if you could kick off that discussion, that would be great.
We have now wrapped up going through all of the proposed budgets for everything that's in the general fund. We wanted to basically put a point in time to have a general discussion with the committee about anything related to any of those funds before we move on to any of the other funds. So this is kind of your opportunity to ask additional questions, to talk about the general fund, any concerns you have. So once we're done with the general fund, we can put that behind us and move forward. So this could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour, depending on kind of where you want to go.
Nancy, go ahead.
Joe, I've been thinking over the week about this business analyst position that is not in the budget. And it seems to me over the last year we agreed upon and funded a lot of new software that was supposedly going to make jobs easier. And it seems to me that when I heard individuals talk, the library and other individuals on staff, one of the themes I was hearing was that the software wasn't that easy, that they were struggling with it, and they were acting as their own IT person. So I don't know how you do it. I don't know where you find the money for it, but it seems that that is a crucial position based on all of the software we've just added. And I just like a little discussion about that. Or none, that's okay.
I would like to jump in and add to that. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the frequency in which I saw, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 budgeted for software subscriptions in every department as we were going forward. And I talked to Brad about this last week, and we don't really have, I was asking, well, we have a master record of what all that is and how much it costs and when we renew, and is it installed correctly, is it being serviced correctly? And I don't know that we have a firm grip on that, and it seems like a lot of thousands of dollars from all the various budgets that who's managing that very specific. So I kind of noticed that same thing. And I also noticed last week that at least a couple of department heads talked about how it has been challenging. Implementation, right. Seamless integration with the city's process. I know the police department also had some in their budget that I saw tonight. So I see it coming and coming again and again and again, and all totaled it adds up to like over $100,000. It's quite expensive. So,
if I could add to that, and just speaking from my experience, having managed teams that ran literally hundreds and hundreds of implementation projects for cities, finance, payroll, planning, zoning, utility billing, all across the country. Well, that's not true. 35 states, but. In my experience, the key thing, there's two things where cities fail in an implementation: change management and project management. And I've seen cities staff a business analyst position, and it can be helpful on kind of the detailed day-to-day stuff. But if you're implementing something new, and anytime you implement something new, it requires change in the organization and a coordination of a lot of activities. I'm not even sure, especially for the bigger stuff, a business analyst is going to be that helpful in that piece of it. And I've always advised organizations that if you're going to do especially a bigger project, that you budget as a part of that project management and change management.
Bring somebody on site.
Bring as part of that project. We have some wonderful staff like Sylvia, who just naturally is able to do that and is doing a wonderful job, but that's not always the case, right? We hire people to be good at finance. We don't necessarily hire them. I'm not saying you're also very good at it too, Katie, but when you hire someone to be technically very good in a specific area like public works, finance, it's not in their job description to be change managers and project managers as well for those types of projects. So I have the same concern. It's even a higher level concern too, also in terms of how we're coordinating all that, right? What's our overall strategy for how we're moving to the cloud and in what order, and are we picking the right products? How are they going to all integrate together? And I don't even know if a business analyst you can speak to that, Brad, but how effective it is going to be to really help us with all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're in a larger organization, a business analyst is very focused on, but in a smaller organization like ours, they're multifaceted, right? So, and we don't even have a lot of new software implementations. We have a handful where this person fits in really well. But once you install the software and start using it, you don't stop changing it and tweaking it and doing different things to make it work better for you. And I think that's where our gap is. We got a lot of really great products that could be a lot better in some areas. It's finding the time and the bodies to do that. Case in point, we've been trying to go paperless, with some of our HR and finance forms. There's great tools out there to make all of these paper Word docs electronic. It's going to cost us $10,000 to have a consultant come do it. This would be a primary task that I would have given to the business analyst to do, and they would have been able to do it probably in a couple weeks. They had done this role in the past. We have a lot of those little things that they don't rise to the level of needing a body for, or they don't rise to the level of paying $10,000 for, but boy, the impact they have, it actually kickstarts something in the organization, says, okay, we're not going to do these paper forms anymore. We're going to do these electronic forms. And
so it streamlines efficiency.
Totally does. And it takes a maintenance, a support load off of other staff that are now having to do some of these tasks. It helps end user support. It helps social media. This person was also responsible for our website. There was a lot of those other things that you can't just say, go be a social media expert. Yeah. It's not, with the right person, yes, you can. But because we're a small group, we have to have multiple different hats, and software implementations is one of those.
So one of the things I would agree with Russell and Tim as well, and I would echo all of your comments about the common thread with department heads and the messaging that we heard, and there is a gap, and there's a lack of, it sounds as if there is a lack of efficiency, and department heads and others are working really hard to cover one another. And it sounds like a position of some sort, whether they're called a business analyst or something else, could really be beneficial across the board. Having said that,
I don't
we
know
are
where the money,
tasked with a balanced budget. And so should the budget committee make a recommendation to council that this is an important enough position for us to include in this fiscal budget, where are we going to get the funds to make it happen? That is our task. So what's the priority for the budget committee to make a recommendation to council? Where are we getting the funds? So that is the question, is what can go away if this is an important enough of a position for us to add and sustain, because I don't feel like a one-time investment is sensible or at all efficient. Rather, this would be something that we would have to sustain long-term. That's my 2 cents.
I would say I appreciate the insight. I think my position in this is our job as the budget committee is to make sure we're living within the means of what the city can afford. And I feel like it's Joe's job to make those recommendations in terms of what he feels he needs to do to run this city. And if the council doesn't feel like he's doing his job, then obviously they'll make that switch. So in terms of my opinion, I mean, I'm not going to prioritize because I'm not the one working in the city. He's doing it along with his department chair. So I trust his judgment. I would agree. I think it's obviously an important one, but when you have so many things you're trying to prioritize, I leave it to the expert to figure out where that money has to go.
And I actually, it may not have sounded like before, but I kind of agree with you. I think where I was going with my comments is if we're going to bring in a new piece of software, part of the cost of bringing, we got to be honest with ourselves about what the cost of that software is. And if we need consulting services or something to help do that, we need to budget for it. I mean, I love the fact that staff wants to go the extra mile and try to figure out how to do it on their own and make it happen, but that's just taking away from their time, and it can be difficult. Some people, it's easy. Some people might struggle trying to do something like that just based on their talents and their skill sets. So I agree with you. I think that would be my approach.
So, and speaking, and I'm going to say this humbly, as somebody who does software implementation project management, I understand the importance of that role. So I do this at the state, and much to echo what Tim was saying is, you can't just buy a software, drop it in, and expect it to work well. There has to be integration management. There has to be training. There has to be, there's so many pieces that go into it. And I appreciate the fact that we're modernizing. I know that, Brad is also looking at forward thinking on some of these things, and hopefully the integration of those is important. But you do get into, and I've seen this firsthand with the state, is where you buy some software that you think looks good, you buy it, you plug it in, the users can't use it, or it doesn't integrate with half of your legacy systems, and you're using it to 25% of its actual utility. I just want to make sure that we are looking big picture at how we're moving forward with this, and we're not just piecemealing stuff together and suddenly now having 6 systems that don't integrate and speak to each other. So, again, maybe not as applicable to what we're talking about today, but I think it is something to look at bigger picture.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is valuable input. This is a position that was not in my proposed budget. Does not mean I don't think it's valuable or needed. It simply goes back to your comment. You have multiple priorities. You can't meet them all with the resources you have. I made some choices in my budget. I would like to see this position. I don't think we have lots of software conversions going on. I can think of 2. That's it. Business license is going to be done soon and launched. That'll be done in the next month or 2. And then Sylvia's project, which is the record system, which, quite honestly, Sylvia wants to get that done, and she finally has a tool. She's been asking for that for many, many years, and she's happy, and she wants to move that quicker than how it's moving now. I think if we had this analyst, it probably would have been a little smoother, but it's moving forward. Departments are actually buying into it, and we're using the system. I mean, for the state to say, hey, you guys are doing it the right way, we're going to use you as an example. I don't think there's the problems that you guys are thinking that there are problems. There are normal issues with any kind of software conversion. I would love to see this position back in the budget someday, but quite honestly, when I looked at all the other positions, this was not.
You don't feel like it's a detriment to us and
Nope.
efficiency?
Okay. Yeah, and I respect that. And I didn't want to imply that I thought Sylvia was having a problematic rollout. She's doing a wonderful job with that. Actually, the line item that got me most interested in this was the Infor move to the cloud.
Correct.
116,000 one time. It's the same vendor, but going from a server-based, rich client-based product to a cloud product, you might as well be buying new software from a new vendor. And so that was the one I was actually worried the most about in terms of making sure that we've got all the resources we need to pull that off.
I think my comments were not necessarily.
And I'm curious to hear what, because I haven't heard a lot about that project.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It might be off base there.
One would argue Infor is probably the most critical piece of software we have, probably parallel to financials, right? I mean, it's the utility billing application. It is the most resource intensive. I think there's something like 9 servers that run this application, and is highly dependent on the vendor to help us with software upgrades and maintenance and patching. And I don't want to go too technical here, but they've, the concept of multi-tenant cloud and single-tenant cloud, they finally have multi-tenant cloud, which is more like an application that is very, I don't know how to phrase it, maybe more out-of-the-box type in a sense, but very configurable so that it can be less customizable. It can be configured to meet your needs as opposed to being customized and recoded and reprogrammed to meet your needs. You run into issues when you start doing code changes to applications when you try to do upgrades. So this is one that I fully support moving to the cloud. They're still a little new in this multi-tenant space, but if we can get there, I think it will take a huge load off of IT from a maintenance standpoint, and then even just from a physical server standpoint. It's 9 servers with a development environment and a production environment, and a lot of moving pieces that if any one of those fail or break, never happened yet, but it could be detrimental. So
You don't have to answer in this movie, but I'd like to see what the lift in ongoing cost is associated with that with SaaS fees versus maintenance fees.
If as I recall, it's about a $20K increase, which is, in my mind, felt pretty reasonable from on-prem to full hosted on cloud multi-tenant.
Where is it today?
I don't know the exact number. I just remember what the difference was. I don't pay that bill, so it comes out of a combination of community development and public works. So
I would echo what Brad said. It's an important piece of software for both community development and public works.
The most important software is any software where you get money and software where you pay people, right? So, yeah, I would agree with that. Don't underestimate a cloud move.
No. And I think right now what we're doing is we're evaluating their ability to take what we currently have and move it to the cloud. So,
Russell?
My comment was not necessarily about that position, that staff position. Just in general, it seemed like, and I think a lot of organizations suffer from this. We have, I saw a lot of software subscription listed there, not necessarily projects or changes that were taking place, but it seems like that is kind of an ongoing trend. We're going to be leasing everything. We're not going to own anything at some point. And my concern was a comment you made last week about we don't really have someone specifically to kind of manage the whole process. And I would like we went through an asset inventory a while back, it would be a good idea to make sure that all of this money we're spending on all of these pockets of software is well spent and not used at 25% of whatever the.
I think it is. I really do. I mean, that line that makes up, the biggest chunk of my budget is probably 20 software packages, but that includes all the server software. It's mainly my back-end systems. Mainly.
Well, I think you listed like 100. What was it? 147 or whatever.
Right, but some of those are, small applications that don't have maintenance contracts per se to them. So I'm happy to kind of go through that list with you. The big one in there is our Microsoft agreement. It makes up probably a quarter of that amount. And it is what runs our organization. It is our email, it is our SharePoint, it is our file sharing, collaboration.
And I really don't want to get to the nuts and bolts at all of that. Mm-hmm. I trust you guys to handle that. I would like to talk about increasing the hours for the senior center manager
and the chef.
And the chef.
Well, let's stick with, Mr. Mayor, did you have a question related to IT at all?
I was just going to remind that I truly treat budgets as a living document, that you approve a budget, and that's the plan, but then as conditions change, as you learn things, as you find savings, as you find revenue, then you can find new opportunities, or you have to make adjustments, positive or negative. So just food for thought. My stance on the personnel side is I'm okay with the proposal without changes.
Thank you.
I have a question about a different topic, but do you want to tackle Russell's senior center thing first?
Your time, so however you want to do it.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Yep.
You want to move on to senior center?
Well,
that came up. There's
I have another question, but
okay.
if he asked first, so I didn't
Okay.
know.
No, I just want to put it
Yeah.
out there as
Yeah.
one thing we might discuss.
Yeah, so on my list of things that I've been kind of tracking, senior center, policing, public works, and economic development, all of those topics seem to be maybe unresolved.
I have another one.
Okay.
So this is in light of the letters that we received from some staff.
Yeah.
First off, I want to say to staff, number one, I am so appreciative of the fact that you stepped forward with your thoughts. That kudos. Secondly, I also appreciate the fact that not only did you share your concerns, you came up with some ideas for some consideration or some ideas that would maybe solve or help with the issue. So my question to you, Joe, is the PERS idea of the staff paying 6%, that is because of the 5-year forecast, correct? It's not necessarily for this year's budget.
It's not in this year's budget.
Not in this.
Okay.
Somebody's proposing to do something about PERS in this year's budget.
I think the only way it's reflected in this year's budget is you have it as a one-time expense for this year.
For example.
Okay.
So
Could I-
maybe,
could I
before
clarify
you continue,
something?
maybe you could do just a quick synopsis of the letter that we received, just so that the public is in the, quickly about where you're going.
Essentially with the idea of, currently the city pays 6% towards PERS for each employee, and the proposal is that the employee take up that 6% down the road. Potentially down the road. The staff had a meetup with City Manager Joe on May 1st, where they learned of this proposal, and there was some pushback and some concern, and they drafted a response to that change. And in that response, they came up with some ideas that we might consider. And so I have a direct question about one of those ideas that we might want to consider later on, but that's the synopsis.
I just wanted to clarify about the PERS. The first thing is that the reason that the proposal was made to put it in the one time and to defer it for a year was to give staff and council the time to look at what is going to happen over the next year and to see what happens in Salem, to see what happens with PERS, because right now nobody knows what's happening. The reason the meeting was held with the employees was that we knew that this 6% is one of the options that is out there and that was being put forward. We wanted this to come from us and not as something that was going to be heard through the budget process. We wanted to make sure that employees knew straightforward from us as management that this was coming from us as one of the possible ways, and so that it didn't come as a surprise. We are not proposing that in this budget it be done, and we are not saying that it's a done deal. We're saying that we need at least a year to see what happens in Salem and to see what can be done, but that this is a potential way, and that in the 5-year scenario, this is what we have built in to say, this is what we believe would work to keep us afloat for this 5-year scenario.
I think that's a really important clarification.
So since it's not in this year's budget, and we plan on, council with staff plans on having a continuing conversation of next year, find out what's going on in Salem, decide if this is something we need to do or not do, discuss the options that staff presented, see if those are viable. It's going to be an ongoing discussion over the next 6 months, probably.
Correct.
Oh, at least, yes.
I think with respect to the second bullet point, which is to review, evaluate, delay one-time expenses, and then in parentheses, police department roof, vehicle replacements, et cetera, until state provides solution for PERS, that would potentially affect this year's budget. So that's why I'm bringing it up, basically to acknowledge the fact that staff took the time to address their concerns, and secondly, there is a potential, or I guess that's my question, is that a potential response to help with the concern?
Deferring a one-time expense
yeah,
does
that's
not
my
help
question.
the problem that
Does not
we're
address
trying to
the
address.
issue.
And I appreciate as well that many staff actually took the time to write to council directly with their opinions and provide feedback and some ideas and put some ideas on the table for discussion.
And that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So the point here, I think that I'd like for you to address is the message from some of the staff that wrote in is that there is concern among staff that the proposal to add policing and to add this economic development position may not be sustainable and could also be at the expense or hinder or take away existing employees. Can you speak to that?
Anything's possible.
Well, of course.
Yeah, I think, we have talked a lot internally, and we're at a much different place than we were even 3-4 years ago. I think we have a better grasp of forecasting. And part of my somewhat frustration is I think that's a good step. But sometimes we spend so much time worrying about 3, 4, 5 years from now, and so much can happen. As the mayor said, budgets are living, breathing documents. A lot can happen, especially 3, 4, or 5 years out. I think this PERS issue, if you're following what's going on in Salem, almost every day there's a different idea that comes out. I think something is going to come out of the legislature this session that is going to reduce our costs. How significant that is, I don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. And partially, if you read kind of the spectrum of reaction to what's going on in Salem, you get that reaction. This is just kicking the can. It's a short-term fix. Others are like, it's a political process, folks, and it's a difficult process. You know, you see a lot of the unions in the state really, you know, not necessarily being supportive of this. This is a big change in the public sector in Oregon. It's not just here in this city. So I think, in a sense, it's been positive that people are talking. Of course, it could affect employees here, no matter where the change come from. It could come from us individually at the city level. It could come from Salem, statewide. The state could impose something. It can come from voters. There are initiatives potentially that are going to be filed. So I don't know what the answer is going to be. Part of me wants to get the issue on the table because it is so critical, because, as I said last week, the costs are unsustainable. We keep talking about adding staff. We need staff in this department. We need staff in this department. We need staff in this department. If we don't address PERS and those costs, we're not going to be able to add those staff. That's the simple view that I have. I don't know what else to say except, you know, it's the big monkey in the room for most public jurisdictions. We're not as bad as some school districts. I mean, if you look at Beaverton, what they're proposing to cut 200 teaching positions. You were talking about your school district that you work with and how fortunate we are with our budget situation compared to your district. So it's a tough issue, and it's not going to end through this process. It's just the beginning of a discussion, I believe.
And I agree with that. And I too, am really appreciative of the employees coming forward and giving us their thoughts and concerns and ideas. I think, Joe, you nailed it on a lot of those points. I would add that, you know, that we've tried to fix PERS multiple times, you know, over the last 10 years, and haven't had a lot of success in this state. So, you know, we need to be realistic too. So giving this a year to see what percolates out, letting at least give staff a heads up so we can have a dialogue with them over the year about this, see what happens in Salem, to see if we do get meaningful reforms out of this. And of course, we may get reforms and it may get challenged in court like it did last time and thrown out. So I think from a forecasting point of view, we have to be realistic, you know, in terms of what this looks like. And I think
you can't be shy about the potential future and the variations. I mean, there is that proposal. I mean, clearly the value of economic development and improving the tax base to help fund community services in as much as we can. And we could talk about a lot of scenarios.
And we're somewhat fortunate because we're in a position where we're not a Beaverton school district where they didn't plan for this 4, 6, 8 years ago. Now they're looking at cutting 200 positions. You know, we have an opportunity to bend the curve now and keep us from having to do that down the road. So,
Well, I think one thing that we can do as individuals, though, is get a hold of whoever's representing us in Salem and tell them how we feel about PERS. Tell them that as, you know, finance people that sit on a committee, this is something that keeps the city from being able to do forecasts and looking into the future, because PERS is always that elephant. And, you know, I think it's great that we got this letter from employees, but they also need to write Salem. You need to talk to whoever's representing you in Salem and let them know, hey, you're the body that has to fix this. We're trying to cope with it, but you have to fix it. I mean, I know I'm going to write them a letter and say, I don't want my kicker. Put it towards PERS. It needs to be helped. And I wouldn't mind not getting a few dollars back that I wasn't counting on anyway. And I think it's okay to tell people what you think. And, you know, this committee can only do so much. But if we reach out to Salem and tell them what we think and how PERS is so hard for cities, they know it, but they need to hear it again, you know? So for all of you that wrote, sit down and write another letter. Find out who it is that, you know, is on the finance committee up there, or who it is that's making these decisions about PERS.
So, moving forward.
There's a question on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, can I ask a quick clarification?
Yes.
Just about the sustainability of the economic development coordinator long term. The plan for that position going from temporary or one time into the permanent bucket is that position hopefully drives out year revenues. It's not reflected in the current forecast.
Exactly.
To make that position sustainable over the future, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to clarify that for the record for people who may question the sustainability of that position.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. And just as a clarification, do you know off the top of your head how much Walmart pays property tax?
I do not know by account.
They're in the top 10.
I thought we had that.
It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
I think their assessed value.
you know, if they just land one a big client like that, you know, it can be just one big one can pay for that position for a long time.
Correct.
Accurately, you'll be paying a lot of property taxes.
Yes.
The Springs is going to be paying a lot of property taxes.
And those are built into the forecast, just so you know. Don't think that these forecasts are just base rates. They're those large things they're already in there.
But if we get something that is totally not on the horizon, and
that would be different.
That would be different. That would change those numbers, and that goes back to the mayor's comment. This is a living document. You're always kind of doing updates. Hopefully, looking at increasing your revenues and not necessarily the expense side of the house. So,
A potential hotel, then one planned by Planet Fitness, is that?
There are a minimum of there's a minimum of 4 locations where people are looking at hotels. I have no idea if any of them will happen, but the fact that people are having serious conversations with folks, I think is exciting.
and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at that 5-year forecast, the first 2, maybe 2.5 years are pretty solid, but you get out to years 4, especially years 4 and 5. There's a lot of still educated guesses in there.
I assume you count for things like that we have applications in, like Hobby Lobby and.
Correct. And I don't account for them by property. We account for amount of volume compared to normal amount of volume and approximate property size and the lots that have been built but that are not yet in the process of paying for the taxes. So we don't do a lot by lot in the forecast. It's more of a broad
But I think we spend, especially early in the process, a lot of time, and we bring Julia in, and we argue about, she wants to be as conservative as possible in terms of revenues. And usually I'm the one saying, yeah, I think we can bump that up a little bit, you know, but it's still pretty conservative. And then Julia comes in and adds to the mix.
So, a quick synopsis. All of our department heads have presented their recommended budgets. Our city manager, along with Katie, have proposed a general fund that is balanced, right?
There's an outstanding question on the senior center. So if I could answer that question.
Yes, thank you.
So when that question came in, I did plug it into the model. So if those of you who are back to the wall can turn around. This is the difference in the 5-year projection at 5 years between the proposed budget and the new budget. So the amount of the difference there is approximately 100,000 at 5 years out for adding those two positions in.
Adding what positions?
So not adding any positions, adding hours, 3 hours a week for the chef and making the manager full-time
At the senior center.
at the senior center,
Just 5 more hours a week.
which is 5 more hours a week, correct.
And is this forecast expecting any additional revenue? Because
That's right, there was a revenue piece.
revenue that's supposed to be there too.
It was 2,000 something, wasn't it? 2,500?
Is that for the
Versus
cooking,
what
the
additional
cooking
expense?
classes?
It was like cooking classes, wasn't it? Something like that.
Which were very popular.
So instead of having a negative cash flow of blank, if you change the hours, it'll be what? What would the negative cash flow of the senior center become?
She's saying over 5 years, it's 100,000. But she's going to put the revenue
So it's
offset.
20,000 a year, 2,500 in revenue, so $1,750. Or 17,050. Yeah, sorry.
That meets our
Yeah.
goal number 3.
You gonna run a new chart? Thank you. What's the delta?
Trying to get it so that we can. Oh, 90. About.
So that could be,
By Keith's foot, Susan.
Yeah.
By Keith's foot.
So 90,000 at year 5 is within margin of error on a graph of this size. So it's, yeah, and my point is that you start to see the difference at the next PERS increase. So again, with 2020, 2021, 2022, there's hardly any difference, and then you start to see the difference at the next PERS increase.
Before we know what they're going to do to her.
That's what I'm saying, is it, PERS is what makes that.
I mean, you never hate to give hours and have to take it back at some point, but the reality is some point you might need to reduce hours again. But
Correct.
we could have 3 years of,
assuming that's accurate, if year 5, if we haven't bent the curve, we might be looking at eliminating a complete position to get that back, right? So,
I'm supportive of the proposal from the city manager on.
as it stands, as presented.
And I would also say, I mean, I appreciate what we're trying to do, but I would also say, is that what you want, Joe? I mean, that's a little extra money. Is that how you want to spend it? That's not my decision. I think it's your decision as a manager if that's what the priority is. So,
Again, it sounds like a relatively small amount, but in looking at projections and balancing everything else, I didn't include it because I'm concerned about the future.
I think there's an optics piece too. If we're talking about a 6% hit to PERS and we keep adding here and there and everywhere, I think that sends a.
Well, and we can't add one seasonal worker, which is a small amount compared to.
Yeah, they all add up.
They all add up, and how are we picking and choosing? So.
So then what do you
Joe's
do
budget.
about that 12,000? Because right now you have a $12,000 difference.
It's fine where it is. That's just
Oh, we could
projected
have
revenue and projected
$35,000.
expenses, so we'll end up probably better than that. We always do, but if I came in, I'm sorry, Paul, just a second. If I proposed a budget that used every last penny, I think this committee would be like, ooh, you're really cutting it close. Or if I come in with a budget that leaves $100,000 on the table and we have needs. So I'm trying to get as close as possible without getting razor thin. And Councilor Roush, you're right. That is a council goal to increase programs and activities at the senior center, but I think they're doing that already. This would just supplement that. If we were not doing what we're doing with the staff over there, I think I'd be more concerned about we're not meeting the council's goal. I just don't think we can afford it at this point. And even though it's a small amount, and it's just the reality, then that's why I said no.
If you're able to continue to leverage volunteers, then that gets you there too. And I think it's safe to say everyone thinks that the staff change that occurred at the senior center was a massive, positive home run, and give them a chance to continue.
I was going to say,
I'm sorry, Paul, I cut you off. So.
I think it was 2 years ago, we put together a supplemental budget of priorities to put into a supplemental budget if there was additional money that came in that was unexpected. And I think if we might, do something like that, prioritize the different things that weren't put in the budget and make that a, priority 1, 2, 3, 4 like we did 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would let Joe prioritize them. I wouldn't want to prioritize them. But I see what you're saying. I think we even added during a supplemental budget Maya's position, or adding ours, so, yeah.
Well, we've already given him direction in terms of vision and focus and prioritize within that. Absolutely.
There was one proposal that was put out when the senior center came up, and the senior center manager asked if there would be consideration of adding just the 3 hours to the chef, which the offset was only $2,000 difference, I believe, between the revenue and the expense. If there wasn't a way to add her hours, if there would be a way to add just the 3 hours to the chef, because she believed that it would add such a vital program to the participants and to other members besides the seniors. So I just wanted to mention that in case there was any interest in
And that was the least
in
costly
running
of
that.
the two
That was the
options.
least costly of the two.
What would that be a year?
So it's a difference of about 2,500 total instead of the larger increase. And I'm trying to find the spot to run the.
Would that allow him to run the cooking classes?
Yeah, and you could
Right.
bring in more revenue.
Joe, that's your.
I would be fine with that. That's a very small impact.
Well, you have the discretion to do that.
I'd like to hear it. I mean, if the budget committee was supportive of that, that's part of this process, I'd like to hear that.
Are we discussing it now, or are we kind of parking lot?
You can parking lot it, once we're done with general fund, we want to get onto the other utility funds, and we have time tonight, but once we're done with the general fund, I kind of want to put that behind us, if possible.
The goal would be for us to come back next week with the write-up, the legal write-up of how to call out the motion. So for us to know what you would like to propose for the approved budget. So if possible, it would be really nice to know what the general consensus is on what's being added and what's not.
Joe, these personnel requests not in budget, were these in any order?
I don't believe so.
So do you
But
need-
obviously, these positions, because they were relatively small increases, and it's a council goal, was the first on the chopping block when I said no. So again, restoring some additional hours for the chef so he can actually offer some of these classes and bring in some more revenue, I think that makes sense.
So do you need a motion or?
No, I think it's
What
more
Just a consensus. So the difference now is 20,800 at 5 years. for just the 3 hours in the chef position.
Does that cook in assumed additional revenues from the cooking classes?
It assumes the $2,500.
Okay, gotcha.
So are there any major concerns with the general fund as presented by Joe and staff? So I don't hear a yay on that. So my question is everyone in agreement, or do you feel comfortable with adding these few hours to the chef position so that that could be added? Yes? Is
I'd
there
be okay
any-
with that.
Mayor Mays is
Joe's call as far as I'm
no.
concerned.
I'm good with what's presented.
Okay.
If Joe has the authority, if he thinks there's enough interest after he can do it. Part of my concern is, yes, it could be great, but it could only be interesting in a class that is of interest to participants for 6 months, and then nobody signs up after that. And so now you got the hours, and there's not the revenue anymore.
Can it be a one-year expense where it's like an increase in hours or FTE for 1 year to see how the attendance goes for the classes?
Anyone's hours are always up for negotiation.
I think there is a lot of potential, but I want to leave it in Joe's hands on this one, because potentially if the person has more hours and able to serve more food because the lunches are more and more popular, for instance, or the classes, or none of the above.
Yeah, I'll just throw in my 2 cents. I'm supportive of this. I think in the past year I've heard more about the meals at the senior center than I've ever heard in the time I've lived here at Sherwood, and I think that's directly related to the new chef we have. I think there's some benefit here, potentially in a revenue standpoint, but I think also in a just city community-based thing. I think it's worth it. So I support it.
Yeah, how about we leave it in Joe's hands and,
Yep.
and the hours can be ebb and flow with when the class is scheduled. I mean, maybe there's weeks there's no class. You don't need more hours.
So what I'm hearing is that the budget committee is at a point where we would recommend to council to approve the general fund as presented.
And I will bring the administrative changes that need to be made, such as the $35,000 that was included that does not need to be there anymore. And then there was a typo for the page that needs to be changed. So these will be brought back next week for final approval.
Great. All right.
So, and just to be clear, it'd be final approval for everything, assuming we get, are we going to be able to get?
Depending on how far we get, it's 8:45 right now, so.
You want to come back with the adjustments for the entire budget, not
That's
just
correct.
the general fund, assuming we can get through it tonight.
These, I think capital improvements and public works utilities should.
Go.
would like
Let's
to
do
go
it.
Yep,
pretty
let's go.
quickly. So Julia and Craig, would you mind coming back on?
And while they're coming up, if you're curious, if you don't know already, the Blazers lost.
Oh.
By 3. They were ahead. So they played their little hearts out.
Somebody tell us what page to start on.
It's on page 39 of your budget document. And I'm going to start. So just as a reminder, the capital improvement projects are essentially new projects, replacement of something where there's going to be an asset. It's not just simply maintenance, and it's generally funded with system development charges, although the capital operational projects are funded with operational funds. On page 39 and 40 is a list of the full 5-year CIP, but really the budget that is being truly adopted is the 1920 project list. When we do the 5-year budget, we have a bunch of projects and some estimated revenues, which may or may not come in, or we may be over, and so in future years we may have more projects on this list or not be able to fund something in a specific fiscal year. But everything in 1920, we are very confident that we either have the funds or will have the funds. They're based on projects that we either have the money or we are actively going through a building permit process, and we're very certain that they're going to come in. Most of the projects on the one-year CIP are actually continuing projects. They're projects that started in the last year or prior years and are continuing. The real exceptions for the most part are the public works operational projects, because those are generally just a one-year time frame. Other than, I'm just looking at the under general construction, Parks SDC methodology update, the pedestrian, 99W pedestrian connection feasibility study, which actually we did a supplemental budget this year, so we sort of already have approval to do that. And then the YMCA operation or the expansion plan is not an operational project specifically. Other than that, Craig, did you want to add anything about any of your operational projects that are going on? Do you have any questions about the projects that were?
Where's Blake Street?
Blake Street is actually, where is it physically?
Where is it? Because
that's
Google
the
Maps-
Tonkin Employment Area East-West Connector.
Oh, it's not there yet.
It's
not there yet.
So you'll notice.
So it doesn't exist, and it may not be called Blake.
Correct.
I mean, there's a Blake Street in Tualatin, which kind of maybe.
And that's why it got the name Blake Street. We had referred to it as the Tonkin Employment Area East-West Collector. But it,
sexy.
Yeah, it's a great
catchy
name. But it ultimately, the intersection will line up with Blake Street and Tualatin, so it sort of started being called Blake Street, but it may not.
It might not be called that in the future.
$11 million on a street that I couldn't find on the map.
Good catch.
It's a gold-plated street.
Good catch.
We could call it Griffin Street.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
And Councilor Griffin, that's a good reminder, and the mayor has said this numerous times, when we go out and look for money, that's a project we're going to go out and look for other money to build.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's the county, metro, the state, federal, that's an essential piece to opening up the Tonkin employment area. And we don't have necessarily $10 million or $11 million there in the bank to build that road. If we did, we may have been doing it already. So.
And that's a good point. There are certainly projects on this list that we know we don't have money for, but we want them to be on the list so that when we apply for grants, we can say it's in our CIP, and that helps the argument.
So, Julia, if I can just add a quick question, just a clarifying question really on looking at the 5-year plan, some of the first 3 projects, for example, you got the estimated cost, then you got the 1920 budget, and obviously that doesn't show all of. So, for example, 1,402,085 for the estimated cost, but it's only showing 1,000,002 for that. That just shows that we've already spent some money on that previously.
Right.
So some of these that don't add up means that there's already money spent.
That is exactly
Okay,
correct.
just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. And then just to point out, as I understand it, and certainly for the people at home, the Sunset Boulevard Highway 99 intersection is the one that people have been asking about a lot at the YMCA new high school intersection, where we're going to be making some changes to improve safety there, add left turn lanes, crosswalks, I believe, are on the plan for that as well.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know how much I want to say this for the county to hear, but when we put this in the budget for 1.2 million, or since we put this in the budget for 1.2 million, we actually began conversations with the county. They're doing the Kruger-Elwert project, and in discussing with them, we found it would actually be much more advantageous for them to do that project. And the estimate that we've gotten from them is about half of what we've budgeted. So we'll still keep that in there this year, but we may have some additional money to spend other places from that savings.
Fantastic.
Yeah, those are projects that have to get done so we can open the new high school in 2020. Yep.
So on the YMCA expansion plan, are there any requirements of the YMCA to do any interior improvements before the city agrees to do any expansion?
They will probably be I don't know the answer to that. There will probably be interior renovations of the current building, which we own. As part of that expansion, that's part of the preliminary design work that the architect is starting to do, is how do we add on to this facility and then also renovate the current space. It goes hand in hand, and what would that cost? So the why is part of the team to put that together, but the city is taking on the financial responsibility to come up with the preliminary plans for the building, because it's our building,
Right. Okay.
if that answers your question.
Okay. I don't have any specific questions about CIP. Does anybody else?
And I want to point out before we dive into the actual funds, that we've had a shift in accounting between where operating projects are held. So we previously had a lot of the streets projects that are considered operating projects because they're paid for with street operating funds that are actually capitalized. And so as we progress through how we're categorizing our fixed assets and working through all of that, we've discovered that there are a lot of assets, our grind and overlays, that are actually new assets by the depth and the size of the asset that's being created. And so we want to standardize how we're paying for and accounting for these assets. And so those are now being accounted for in the street capital fund. And if they're going to be paid for in part with street operating funds, then those will be transferred over so that the asset, the construction of it and all of that is all accounted for in the capital fund to allow us to keep the accounting clean. So that is a big change from previous years. And in that change is the error that I addressed in one of the emails out. And so we will bring back to you, we're still in the process of figuring out where everything's going to go with the job. So by next week, you will have the corrections for the current year and then for next year as we true up what's landing in this year and what's landing in next year, because there's always fun in the summer to figure out which pieces of road are going to be done in which year. But that's affecting those numbers. So any questions about Fund 18 and Fund 31, that's what's causing it. Streets and street capital is a change.
Last question. Actually, I do have one last question. I'm sorry. I don't mean to belabor this issue because I'm certain you've covered it. But county participation in any slowing of traffic efforts along 99, where the
It's a federal facility, or it's a state facility, not a county facility.
this street, the Highway 99 between the Y and
Highway 99 is an ODOT facility.
okay. So is there any participation from ODOT as we're working toward
As part of the project.
pedestrian connectivity between Sunset and
So,
Speed limit, you mean?
yeah, when the new school opens?
so they are not funding any of the road improvement projects. That's the county, because that's Elwert and Sunset and all those. They certainly will be part of the discussion of their intersection. Separate and part of the 99W pedestrian feasibility study, we will likely have conversations about kind of how best and safest to do that. And I know we are actually working with our state representative to try to convene some folks to talk about that, but we haven't gotten to that level of conversation yet.
And that will be, obviously, the city, the county will be involved because they have roads adjacent, and
Well,
ODOT will
that
be
was
at
my
the
point.
table.
Hopefully, these numbers might be offset even more than, that maybe 600,000.
No, I don't think that.
They won't be
ODOT money.
contributing
Not
funds.
at all.
No.
That's
Chasing,
unfortunate.
yeah, it's too late to get.
Yeah.
But we will be asking for contributions, and our state rep is generally supportive, and actually is reaching out to us to say, look, let's sit down and talk, because ODOT should be part of the solution. And when she says ODOT should be part of the solution, I'm like, okay, that means financial contributions to make a pedestrian connection there, a bridge or something happen.
Right.
So.
Well, good.
But that's not included in.
That's not
That's
included
not
in there.
That would be
Okay,
another
that would
project.
be another project.
Unfortunately, timing dictated what we're doing.
All right, great. Thank you both.
I think it's Craig gets to stay up here.
He's just moving the chair.
Tell us what page, Craig.
Welcome back, Craig.
Like page 82.
Street ops.
Bad eye pages. Look at the big ones. The rest of us need these to see.
I got those back there too. Okay, streets. The change in streets would be, we did ask for a maintenance worker 2 in streets to help with the utility work in
What page are you on? I'm sorry.
82. We did have this position probably until about 2008, 2007, and that was a position that we cut. So you currently have where you see the 5 FTEs at the bottom there. You really, by the time you do all of our programs and our billing that comes out of streets, you actually have about little over one person that actually works in the field. That actually every day comes to work and goes to work in the field. One and a half. We have to pull a lot of people from other sections in the middle of the summer when it's our busy time to do our crack sealing program, to do a lot of the stuff that's got to get done with our striping, markings, traffic markings, that kind of stuff. So I could be off a little bit. Maybe it's almost 2, but it's very low compared to that number that you see there. So there's a lot of time that goes into the project side, slurry seals. That's another big number that's in here in the budget this year. And you'll see there's about $10,000 to do some work downtown on the street lights that are fading. So maybe it's a little bit more than the 10,000, but that's the difference in this year's budget from last year's. Besides that, it's pretty much standard. What's that?
Hear the word status quo.
Status quo. No, not status quo.
We decided last week.
Craig, on that.
Pretty standard street budget.
Can we look at 6301? Is there a project in there that says electricity, street lights, we go from 20,000 to 209? I mean, it's been.
That's not right. There's a 0 or something that's not there.
20,000 is a typo on my staff's error. It's supposed to be 200,000.
All right, then it's not a problem. Yeah. Thank you.
And you'll see our slurry seal comes out of the actual repair and maintenance of streets. That's where a big chunk of money goes every year.
So my earlier question about sidewalk maintenance.
Yeah.
That falls here. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where the revenue comes in, and this is actually, it comes out of, we usually hire somebody to do that work for us.
Okay, so that is something, that's a seasonal.
Right, actually, we inspect the sidewalks, we gotta go mark the sidewalks, we deal with the property owner on the grant program, and then we actually have a contract. The city is went out and procured, yep, and the property owner can take advantage of that, and then have a year to pay it back.
Got it.
That's where on the bill, I think it's the water bills, that's where the
Sidewalk fee.
$5 or whatever
Yeah.
it is goes towards that.
Yep, and then you'll notice back on the Capitol, when we talked about Capitol, there's a Woodhaven, the sidewalk in front of the YMCA since the new school's opening. There's about 400, 500 feet of sidewalk in front where the berm's at. That's coming out of the Capitol side, but that is, you'll see a safe sidewalk to school on the utility bill, and that's the project that's paying for that this year.
And how long will that be on the utility bill?
As long as we have projects or the council at 5 years or it rolls over. We have to identify projects, I think is what the resolution says. So.
That fee also pays for the, where the homeowner can split the repair costs on their sidewalks 50/50.
Yeah, that's a separate one than
That's
the
a separate
safe
one.
school, yeah.
Okay.
Any other question on streets? I mean, the main road back on the Capitol side that we talked about is Main Street. It's a grind and overlay. Those numbers are about a 60 PCI, and that's when you want to come in and grind it 1.5 inches off, so you don't end up having to rebuild the road. So that's why that street's been identified.
And are we over
do for a new PCI, or we do that every year?
Every 3 years. So we got about another year left, and then we'll our road system will get reviewed again. Any other questions? What's the next one on here, Joe?
Water.
Water. Let's see. Only change really, there's a few changes in water, but the big one is the purchase amount of water, because we're predicting that we'll purchase about, I think it's 1.6 million out of that budget this year. Yeah, almost 1.7 just to purchase water from the treatment plant to get it here. So that's the big chunk of that budget. There's some additional sampling that we got to do this year for our water quality, and that's really about most of the stuff is fixed cost in water.
Sanitary?
Sanitary, I hate to say the word status quo, but that one is, one is standard,
It's not
yes.
backward.
That one, not a lot's changing that. Yeah, there you go, I like that one. That, sanitary doesn't, we don't have a lot of projects because there's not a lot of money in sanitary. That's the one, utility fund that we have projects to do, but no funding to do.
And storm.
Storm, one of the changes in storm is we've asked for a maintenance worker 2 in storm to go with our open space maintenance program that we are more, I'd say we don't do a very good job because we don't have the staffing to do it, so it gets put behind. Really, we've invested in tons in our open space of trees, vegetation, the buffers, and this person as well as helping our field staff in other areas when needed, doing our normal maintenance.
It looks like generally there's a little bit more personnel in each of the funds.
It's how we shift personnel where our workload's at.
Okay. All right. Any specific questions about utilities? Great. All right, thanks, Craig.
See that? Boom. I like it.
So it's 9:05, just a quick check-in time-wise.
You guys have it in yet?
I'm good to adjourn.
What does the agenda look like for next week?
Well, yeah, broadband, debt service, TLT, which is all, the items that are there, I don't anticipate significant.
So for the rest of us, we've got URA afterwards. How long do you
URA
expect that?
should be pretty straightforward, so I think we could probably adjourn, as the mayor's saying tonight, and come back.
And I think our third meeting last year was like short.
So for me, I would prefer that we adjourn or do debt service and transient lodging and grants, because those are straightforward. But broadband and URA, I'd prefer that we have time to talk about, and that we have time to talk about when we're lucid enough, because I do have some questions, and there are some decisions that need to be made in those. So I'd rather not do them after hours when the mayor hasn't slept.
Will the mayor promise to sleep next week?
I think we can hit all these next week.
I also have some questions that I'm waiting for answers back from consultants that I just want to make sure I have the information for you, that I'm still waiting to get answers back. So for broadband.
Did you say you wanted to crank through debt service and transient lodging right now? Or?
It's up to you guys. Those will literally take 2 minutes, so either way is fine. Just do them next week.
All next week.
Okay. As just a quick reminder, we are, for next week, we'll look at Sherwood Broadband Debt Service, Transient Lodging, and Grants Fund. Between now and then, if you have specific questions in regard to any of those areas, please send those via email directly to Katie, so that she can respond back. Otherwise, it is now 9:06 and we are adjourned.